Cedar Falls, Montana Territory. Spring of 1891. The church was packed. The air was thick with sweat and shame. And three young women stood at the altar like livestock at market. That's how it started, not with romance, not with hope, but with desperation dressed up as Christian charity. The wooden pews groaned under the weight of every soul in town who could walk or be carried. Farmers in their Sunday best, shopkeepers with nervous hands, women fanning themselves against the spring heat that made the church feel like a furnace. And in the front row, Harold Fitzgerald sat like a spider in the center of his web-pale fingers steepled, watching his carefully orchestrated humiliation play out exactly as planned. The banker was 53 years old, twice widowed, and richer than any honest man had a right to be in a town this small. He was also a patient predator. On the altar, three young women waited. Each wore white. Each looked like she was facing execution rather than matrimony. The youngest couldn't have been more than 16. Tears streamed down Sarah Morrison's face while her mother gripped her hand so tight the girl's fingers had gone white. The second woman was a widow with hollow eyes and calloused hands that spoke of years working land that kept trying to kill her. And then there was Clara. Clara Wynne stood with her shoulders straight and her chin raised. Her dark hair had been pinned up in an elaborate style that didn't suit her. The borrowed wedding dress hung loose in some places and tight in others, a constant reminder that this marriage was not her choice, would never be her choice. But it was her hands that told the real story. They trembled, just slightly. Only someone who knew about fear would notice. Father Mackenzie stood before them, sweating through his collar, reading from a script Fitzgerald had written. The old priest's voice shook with something that might have been shame or might have been terror. In Cedar Falls, the two feelings often looked the same. "Ladies and gentlemen," the banker announced, rising from his pew with practiced grace, "we are gathered here today in the spirit of Christian charity." Christian charity. That's what he called it. These dear ladies find themselves in unfortunate circumstances. Fitzgerald continued, his voice carrying clearly through the packed church. Through no fault of their own, of course, but circumstances nonetheless that require the help of our community's finest men. The crowd murmured agreement. Some faces showed discomfort. Others showed the kind of hunger that made Clara's stomach turn. But no one objected. No one stood up and called this what it was. A slave auction in everything but name. Our first young lady is Miss Sarah Morrison. Fitzgerald gestured to the crying girl like a merchant displaying goods. 16 years old, an excellent cook, skilled in all the domestic arts. Her family's recent misfortune requires that she find a husband who can provide appropriate support. Misfortune. That was Fitzgerald's word for it. The truth was simpler and uglier. Sarah's father had died 6 months earlier. Died broke. Died owing money he'd never owed until Fitzgerald's ledgers said he did. The bidding was brief and brutal. A rancher named Thomas Hewitt stepped forward. He was 45 if he was a day, weathered and thick around the middle. He looked at Sarah the way a man might look at a horse he was considering for purchase. "I'll take the girl," Hewitt said. Not asked, stated, like it was already decided. Sarah's sobs came harder. Her mother turned away, unable to watch, and Father Mackenzie stumbled through the marriage ceremony with all the enthusiasm of a man presiding over a funeral. 5 minutes later, Sarah Morrison became Sarah Hewitt. The girl stumbled down the aisle on her new husband's arm, still crying, while the crowd pretended not to notice. Next came the widow. Her match went faster. A shopkeeper who needed someone to tend his children and keep his house. At least there was something resembling kindness in his eyes. At least they were both choosing this out of need rather than cruelty. Small mercies in a merciless morning. Then it was Clara's turn. Fitzgerald stood again, and this time his smile reached his eyes. This was the moment he'd been planning, orchestrating, savoring. "Miss Clara Wynne," he announced, drawing out her name like he was tasting wine. "Daughter of the late Thomas Wynne, educated in the finest schools back east, accomplished in literature, music, and the social graces." He paused, letting the crowd take her in, letting them see her standing there in her borrowed dress, her trembling hands, her carefully composed face. A rare flower indeed, Fitzgerald continued, looking for a husband who can appreciate her many qualities. Clara kept her eyes fixed on a point beyond the crowd, beyond the church walls, beyond this town that had become her prison. She'd learned that trick as a child. When things got too painful, too overwhelming, you just looked past them, looked toward some distant horizon where maybe possibly things might be different. The silence that followed Fitzgerald's introduction was telling. Everyone in Cedar Falls knew the game being played. Clara Wynne came with debts that could bankrupt a smaller man. Her father had died owing more money than most people in town would see in 10 lifetimes. And the only person wealthy enough to take on that burden was the banker himself. This whole charade had been designed to make his eventual claim look like generosity rather than what it really was: collection on a debt. "Come now," Fitzgerald said after letting the silence stretch long enough to make his point. "Surely someone recognizes what a bargain is being offered here. Miss Wynne is a beautiful, accomplished young woman who would grace any man's home." Still no one spoke. Clara's composure finally cracked, just slightly. She closed her eyes for just a moment. A gesture so small, so private, it felt like witnessing something sacred, the last remnant of hope dying in real time. And that was when he moved. The church doors opened. Not the gentle creak of a latecomer trying to slip in unnoticed, but the hard bang of someone who didn't care about discretion, didn't care about propriety, didn't care about anything except getting where he was going. The crowd turned as one. The man who filled the doorway was massive, 6'4" of solid muscle and weathered bone, shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown elk down a mountain, hands scarred from years of working with wood and metal and survival. A thick beard, wild and untamed, framed a face that looked like it had been carved from the mountain itself. He wore buckskin and leather, smelled of pine sap and wood smoke and the kind of wild freedom that civilized people had forgotten existed. A hunting knife hung at his belt. Old, well used, the leather handle polished smooth by decades of hands. The crowd parted in front of him without conscious thought, people stepping aside like water before a ship's bow. His boots echoed on the wooden floor with each step, steady, purposeful, unstoppable. Fitzgerald's smile vanished. The stranger walked down the center aisle. Every eye in the church followed him. Some faces showed fear, others showed recognition. A few of the older folks whispered names that made their neighbors go pale. Boone. That's Silas Boone, the beast of Elkhorn Ridge. He reached the altar in what felt like both an eternity and an instant. Up close he was even more imposing, but it was his eyes that held Clara's attention, gray as winter storm clouds, but warm, alive, looking at her like she was the only person in the entire church. "I haven't seen a woman in 10 years, he said. His voice was deep, rough from disuse, but steady. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. The church went silent, not the polite silence of a congregation at prayer, but the shocked silence of people witnessing something they couldn't quite believe. Fitzgerald found his voice first. "You can't just... This is highly irregular. She's already..." But Silas Boone wasn't listening to the banker. He crossed the remaining distance to Clara in 3 long strides. His presence filled the space like a force of nature. She could smell the mountain on him now, pine and snow and wood smoke, could see the scars on his hands, the care in his eyes. And then he kissed her. Not gently, not tentatively, but with the desperate hunger of a man who'd been starved for human contact for a decade, who'd forgotten what it felt like to touch another person with tenderness instead of violence. His large, calloused hands cupped her face with surprising gentleness. His lips were chapped from mountain wind, but warm, alive, real. Clara stiffened in surprise. Her hands came up instinctively to push against his chest, but something in the kiss made her pause. Desperation, maybe, or loneliness, or simply the shocking contrast between his rough appearance and the careful way he held her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. For just a moment she kissed him back. The crowd erupted. Women gasped. Men shouted. Fitzgerald's face turned purple with rage and disbelief. Silas pulled back just enough to speak, still holding her face in his hands, still close enough that she could feel his breath. "Marry us," he said to Father Mackenzie. "Not a request, a statement. Now." "You can't," Fitzgerald sputtered, surging to his feet. "She's already promised. She owes—" "To who?" Silas turned to face the banker, keeping one protective arm around Clara's waist. "I didn't hear any promises made. I heard a woman offered in marriage, and I'm accepting." "She owes money," Fitzgerald said, his voice sharp as broken glass. "Her father's debts. Significant debts that— How much?" The simple question cut through Fitzgerald's protests like a blade through silk. The banker's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to name a figure that made half the crowd gasp. $3,000. A fortune. More money than most men in Cedar Falls would see in 5 years of hard labor. Silas reached into his coat without hesitation, pulled out a leather pouch heavy with gold coins. Payment for 10 years' worth of pelts and furs. Savings he'd been accumulating for a purpose he'd never been able to name. Until now. Will this cover it? He poured the contents onto the altar, gold catching the morning light streaming through the church windows, glinting, real, undeniable. The silence that followed was complete. Even the children stopped fidgeting. Every soul in that church understood they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years, decades, generations. Clara stared at the gold, then up at the stranger who had just bought her freedom with his life savings. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Silas Boone," he replied, his voice softer now, meant only for her. "And if you'll have me, I'd like to be your husband." Father Mackenzie looked from Silas to Clara to the furious banker and back again. The old priest had never encountered anything like this in 40 years of frontier ministry. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the gold on the altar, looked at Clara's face. "Do you, Miss Wynne," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Clara looked into Silas's eyes, gray as winter storms but warm with something she couldn't quite identify. Behind her she could feel Fitzgerald's rage like heat from a forge. She knew that if she refused this offer, her fate would be sealed forever. She'd become Mrs. Harold Fitzgerald before sunset. Property and everything but name. But that wasn't why she said yes. She said yes because this stranger had walked into a church full of people who feared him and claimed her anyway, had spent 10 years' worth of savings without hesitation, had looked at her not like livestock or property or a solution to a debt problem, but like a person worth saving. "I do," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "And do you, Mr. Boone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Silas said without hesitation. Father Mackenzie's hands shook as he produced the marriage certificate. His pen scratched across the paper in the silence of the packed church. When it was done, when both their names were signed in black ink that seemed to bind them together more surely than chains, he looked up with something like relief. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana," he said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The marriage certificate lay on the altar between them, still wet with ink, a legal document that had just changed both their lives forever. Silas folded it carefully, tucked it into his coat pocket. Then he offered Clara his arm like a gentleman escorting a lady to dinner. "Shall we go, Mrs. Boone?" Mrs. Boone. The name hit her like a physical blow. She was married to a stranger, a mountain man who had just spent his life savings to buy her freedom from another man's debt. The magnitude of what had just happened began to settle over her like a heavy blanket. But as they walked down the aisle together past the stunned faces of her neighbors and the apoplectic rage of Harold Fitzgerald, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. It might be foolish. It might be dangerous. But for the first time since her father's death, her future was not entirely written by someone else's hand. The marriage certificate rustled in Silas's pocket as they stepped out into the spring morning. A legal bond between two strangers who had just bet their lives on a moment's impulse and a kiss that tasted like freedom. Behind them, Fitzgerald's voice rose in threats and accusations, but the church doors closed on his rage, and for now, in this moment, Clara Wynne Boone was free. 2 horses waited outside, a wagon loaded with supplies. Silas helped her mount with careful hands, not speaking, not explaining, just moving with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd spent a decade doing everything alone and was now adjusting to the presence of another person. Clara settled into the saddle, her city dress unsuited for riding, her delicate leather shoes already pinching her feet. Everything about her screamed wrong for this new life she'd just chosen. But as Silas swung up onto his own horse and they began the journey toward the mountain, Clara didn't look back. She'd married a stranger. She was heading toward an unknown future, and the entire town would be talking about this for years. But she was free, and that for now was enough. The trail up the mountain was barely wide enough for a single horse. They rode in silence. The only sounds were the clip-clop of hooves on stone, the creak of leather saddles, and the wind whispering through the pines. Clara sat behind Silas, acutely aware of every bump and jolt that brought her further from everything she'd ever known. Her city shoes, delicate things with tiny buttons and narrow heels, were already proving inadequate. They'd been designed for drawing rooms and church floors, not for rocky mountain paths where a single misstep could mean a twisted ankle or worse. She could feel them pinching, rubbing. Within an hour she'd have blisters. Silas seemed to sense her discomfort without looking back. "Not much further," he said, his deep voice carrying easily over the sound of the horses. "Another 2 hours. Maybe less if the trail stays clear." Clara nodded, then realized he couldn't see her. "All right," she managed. Her voice sounded small in the vastness of the forest. The mountain air was different from town air, thinner, colder. It carried scents she didn't recognize. Pine sap, sharp and clean, wild sage, something else that might have been snow even though it was late spring. The forest pressed in around them on both sides of the narrow trail. Ancient trees that had stood here since before her grandfather was born, their branches so thick they blocked out most of the sky. She'd never felt so small in her life. "You're not what I expected," Clara said finally, the words escaping before she could stop them. Silas glanced back over his shoulder, one eyebrow raised. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone more." She gestured vaguely, searching for the right words. "More brutal, I suppose. The stories people tell about you in town." "Are probably true," he finished quietly, his attention returning to the trail. "I've done things, Mrs. Boone, killed men who needed killing, but killed them all the same. If that frightens you, I understand." The formal way he called her Mrs. Boone sent a strange shiver through her. She was used to being Miss Wynne, the banker's debtor, the daughter of a failed businessman. Mrs. Boone felt like putting on someone else's clothes. It might fit eventually, but it would take time to feel natural. "Are you going to hurt me?" she asked, the question coming out smaller than she intended. Silas pulled his horse to such an abrupt stop that Clara had to grab the saddle to keep from sliding forward. He turned in his seat to face her fully, his gray eyes serious and intent. "Never," he said, and something in his tone made her believe him completely. "I may be a lot of things, Clara. A killer, an exile, a man who's forgotten how to live around people. But I'm not the kind of man who hurts women. My mother raised me better than that, and my father would roll over in his grave if I ever laid a hand on you in anger." The use of her first name instead of the formal Mrs. Boone made something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "Then why," she asked, "why did you marry me? You don't know anything about me." Silas was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the forest as if it might provide answers. "I saw you standing there," he said finally, "and you looked the way I felt. Trapped. Alone. With no good choices left." He clicked to his horse and they resumed their journey. But something had shifted between them. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was the quiet of two people beginning to take each other's measure. They rode for another hour before stopping to rest the horses at a stream crossing. The water ran clear and cold, snowmelt from higher peaks. Silas dismounted and helped Clara down, his hands careful as they spanned her waist. Strong hands, scarred from work and weather, but gentle. For a moment they stood close together. Clara caught the scent that she was beginning to associate with him, wood smoke and pine soap and something essentially masculine that made her pulse quicken despite herself. "Here." He handed her a canteen. "Mountain water, best you'll ever taste." She drank. He was right. It was cold enough to make her teeth ache and somehow tasted of minerals and stone and ancient ice. "How long have you been up there?" she asked. "On the mountain." 10 years, 3 months, and 16 days. The answer came without hesitation. Not that I was counting. "That's a long time to be alone." "It is." He knelt by the stream, refilling the canteen. At first I thought I was going crazy. The silence, no human voices, no laughter or conversation, just me and the wind and the animals. What changed? I got used to it, I suppose. The silence became a comfort. It meant safety, solitude, the freedom to be exactly who I was without apology or explanation. Clara sat on a smooth rock near the water's edge. Her feet were throbbing now. She wanted desperately to take off these ridiculous shoes, but that felt too intimate somehow, too vulnerable. "Tell me about the feud," she said instead. "The one that sent you to the mountain." Silas's face hardened. "You sure you want to hear that it's not a pretty story?" "I'm going to hear versions of it eventually. I'd rather hear yours." He was quiet for so long she thought he might refuse. Then he began to speak. "The Kellermans wanted our land, my family's land. We'd been there 3 generations, built the homestead with our own hands, but the Kellermans had money and influence, and they wanted to expand their ranch." His voice was steady, controlled, but Clara could hear the old pain beneath it. "When my father refused to sell, they turned to other methods, burned barns, poisoned cattle, made it clear they were willing to do whatever it took." Clara watched his face, saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. "They came one night with torches and rope, planning to burn my father out. Or worse, I was 28. Newly married to a sweet girl named Mary who made the best apple pie in 3 counties. The mention of his ex-wife made Clara's stomach twist with something she didn't want to examine too closely. "I met them at the property line," Silas continued, "told them they could turn around and go home, or they could stay and be buried on Boone land." He looked directly at Clara then, his eyes holding hers. "They chose poorly. How many?" 3 men died that night, including old Jeremiah Kellerman himself. I stood over their bodies as the dawn broke, blood on my hands, smoke rising from our burned-out barn. Clara should have been horrified, should have been afraid, but all she felt was a strange sort of understanding. "You defended your family," she said quietly. "That's what I thought, what I still think. But the town—" He shook his head. The sheriff arrived with half of Cedar Falls behind him, and I saw the fear in their eyes, not healthy respect, the kind of terror you reserve for wild animals and madmen. "You've gone too far this time, Boone," Silas said, imitating the sheriff's voice. "Killing in cold blood, that makes you no better than them. What did you say?" "They came to my land, threatened my family. A man has a right to defend what's his. But they didn't care. No. Mary left me that same week, couldn't look at the blood under my fingernails, couldn't reconcile the gentleman she'd married with what I'd had to become. She packed while I was burying the dead, took the stage east without even leaving a note." The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. The rest of the town followed suit. No one would sell me supplies, no one would hire me for work. Children crossed the street when they saw me coming. Within a month I was a ghost story, a cautionary tale about what happens when good men go bad. "So you came to the mountain." So I came to the mountain." He stood brushing dirt from his hands. "Found this place, built a cabin, learned to live with the silence." Clara processed this, tried to reconcile the gentle man who'd held her face so carefully during that kiss with the killer the town called a beast. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "What you did that night? I regret that it was necessary. I regret that 3 men died. I regret losing Mary and my home and my place in the world." He paused. "But I don't regret defending my father. I'd do it again if I had to." "Good," Clara said firmly, and she meant it. Silas looked at her with something like wonder. "You're not afraid of me." "Should I be?" "Most people are." "I'm not most people." Clara stood wincing as her abused feet protested. "And I think the world is full of people who do terrible things for selfish reasons. But defending your family, that's not terrible. That's human." Something in Silas's expression softened, opened, like a door that had been locked for 10 years finally swinging wide. "We should keep moving," he said, but his voice was gentler now. "Sun'll be setting soon, and you'll want to see the cabin in daylight." They mounted again. This time, when Clara settled behind him, Silas's hand found hers briefly, squeezed once, a gesture of gratitude that needed no words. The trail began to climb more steeply. The horses picked their way carefully over loose rocks and fallen timber. Clara's thighs burned from gripping the saddle. Her hands ached from holding on, but she didn't complain. She was starting to understand something important about this new life she'd chosen. Complaining wouldn't change anything, wouldn't make the trail easier or the mountain gentler. The only thing that mattered was endurance, survival, making it to the next moment and the one after that. "There," Silas said suddenly, pointing ahead, "just through those trees." The cabin appeared like something from a storybook, not the rough, primitive structure Clara had imagined, but a solid, well-built home that spoke of care and craftsmanship. The logs were fitted together with precision, their surfaces smooth and weathered to a silver gray that blended naturally with the surrounding forest. The roof was made of split shingles that overlapped like scales, and the windows, actual glass windows, not just openings covered with hide, caught the afternoon light and threw it back in golden rectangles. A wide porch wrapped around 2 sides of the cabin, chairs positioned to catch both the morning and evening sun. Clara could imagine sitting there with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. The thought surprised her with its appeal. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. Silas looked pleased by her reaction, though he tried to hide it. "Built it myself," he said with quiet pride. "Took most of the first 2 years, but I wanted it done right. A man needs a home that'll last." He helped her down from the horse, his large hands careful and gentle as they spanned her waist. For a moment they stood close together, and Clara caught the full force of his scent, wood smoke and pine and something warm and masculine that made her breath catch. "Inside," she managed. "Inside," he agreed. The cabin's interior was even more impressive than the exterior. The main room was spacious and warm, dominated by a massive stone fireplace that looked like it could heat the entire space even in the depths of winter. The floors were wide plank boards, sanded smooth and polished to a honey-colored shine. Handmade furniture, table chairs, a bookshelf filled with worn volumes spoke of long winter evenings spent crafting useful beauty from raw materials. Everything had its place. Everything showed the care of someone who'd built this space inch by inch with his own hands. "The bedroom's through there," Silas said, gesturing toward a door on the far side of the room. "I'll sleep out here on the couch, until you're comfortable with other arrangements." Clara felt her cheeks warm at the implication. She was a married woman now, legally bound to this man in ways that included obligations she'd never experienced. The thought terrified and intrigued her in equal measure. "That's very considerate," she managed. "I'll get your things from the wagon." Silas headed for the door, then paused, turned back. "Clara." "Yes." "Welcome home." The words hit her harder than she'd expected. Home. She'd lost that when her father died. Had been living in boarding houses and borrowed rooms ever since. The idea that this place, this mountain, could become home. She couldn't finish the thought. After Silas left, Clara explored the cabin more thoroughly, running her hands over the smooth table, examining the books on the shelf. Poetry, philosophy, agricultural texts, the collection of a man who'd had 10 years and nothing but time to read. In the bedroom she found a quilt spread across the bed, intricate pattern of interlocking rings worked in shades of blue and gold, every stitch perfect, every seam precise. The work of someone who had poured love and skill into every inch. "That was my mother's," Silas said from the doorway. She jumped, not having heard him return. "Her wedding quilt. She made it the year before she married my father, spent all winter working on it by candlelight." Clara ran her fingers over the intricate stitching. "It's incredible." She used to say that a quilt was like a marriage, lot of individual pieces that don't amount to much on their own, but when you put them together with patience and care, they become something beautiful, strong enough to last a lifetime. The metaphor hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Clara looked up to find Silas watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment she thought he might reach for her, might close the distance between them and turn their marriage of convenience into something more real. Instead, he stepped back. "I'll leave you to get settled," he said. "There's water in the basin, fresh towels in the chest. If you need anything—" "I'll let you know." He nodded, started to leave, then turned back one more time. "I'm glad you're here, Clara." "So am I," she said, and realized she meant it. After he left, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, the quilt soft beneath her hands. Through the door she could hear Silas moving around the main room, banking the fire, setting out supplies for dinner, the domestic sounds of someone making a home secure for the night. It occurred to her that this was the first time in months she'd gone to sleep without worrying about what tomorrow might bring. Harold Fitzgerald couldn't reach her here. The debts were paid. The auction was over. She was safe. The word felt foreign in her mind, like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. But as she lay back on the bed exhausted from the day's emotional and physical trials, Clara Wynne Boone allowed herself to believe it. Safe. For the first time since her father's death. Safe. Morning came cold and bright. Clara woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood, each strike echoing off the mountainside in a steady rhythm that spoke of long practice and efficient strength. Pale light filtered through the cabin windows, and she could smell wood smoke and something that might have been coffee brewing. She dressed quickly in the same clothes she'd worn yesterday, the only clothes she had. Her city dress felt even more ridiculous here than it had in church. Impractical. Foolish. A reminder that she was a stranger in this world. But she was determined not to be a stranger for long. The main room was empty when she emerged. Through the window she could see Silas splitting logs with methodical precision, his shirt already damp with sweat despite the cool morning air. Each swing of the axe sent wood chips flying, and the pile of split logs beside him grew steadily larger. The coffee was indeed brewing, suspended over the fire in a battered pot that looked like it had been making coffee on this mountain since before Clara was born. She poured herself a cup with shaking hands, then nearly dropped it when Silas appeared in the doorway with an armload of freshly split wood. "Good morning," he said, setting down the wood and moving to pour his own coffee. "I hope I didn't wake you with the chopping." "Good morning," Clara replied, wrapping her hands around the tin cup's warmth. "The coffee smells wonderful." "It's strong," he warned, settling into a chair across from her. "I've gotten used to making it thick enough to float a horseshoe. Might want to add some water." Clara took a sip. Her eyes watered. The coffee was indeed strong, bitter and dark as creek water, but it was hot and caffeinated, and after the events of yesterday, she needed both. "I should probably learn to make coffee," she said, taking another cautious sip. "And breakfast, and, well, everything really. I'm afraid my education didn't include much practical housekeeping." Silas studied her over his own cup, his gray eyes thoughtful. "What did it include?" "Literature mostly. Music. I play piano, though I doubt that will be much use up here. French, which is even less useful. Watercolor painting, embroidery, the kinds of accomplishments that were supposed to help me make a good marriage." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I suppose they did in a way, just not the kind of marriage anyone expected." "Can you read?" Silas asked. "Of course I can read," Clara said, a bit defensively. "I told you I studied literature." "I mean, can you read recipes, instructions books that might teach you practical things?" Clara felt a flush of embarrassment. "Yes, I can read anything. I just never had cause to read anything useful." Silas nodded, rose from his chair, moved to a wooden chest in the corner of the room. From it he pulled out a thick book bound in cracked leather. "This was my mother's," he said, handing it to her with the same careful reverence he might show a religious text. "She wrote in it for 30 years. Recipes, remedies, household advice, anything she learned that might be worth passing on." Clara opened the book carefully, mindful of its age. The pages were filled with neat handwriting in faded brown ink, measurements for bread, instructions for preserving meat, remedies for everything from headaches to broken bones. In the margins, someone had added notes and corrections, the accumulated wisdom of a woman who had clearly known how to make a home in difficult circumstances. "Sourdough starter, never let it die," one page read. 3 parts flour to 2 parts water. Feed it every day like a child. It will feed you for life." "It's beautiful," Clara said, running her fingers over a page titled "Venison Stew for Winter." She must have been a remarkable woman. "She was," Silas said quietly, something in his voice making Clara look up. "Came out here with my father when this was still Indian territory. Raised 4 children. Buried 2 of them before they were grown. Never complained. Never quit. Never let the hardships break her." There was something in his voice when he spoke of his mother, a gentleness that was at odds with his fearsome reputation. Clara looked up from the book to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What happened to her?" she asked. "Fever took her when I was 25. Same winter that killed half the livestock and froze the wells solid. My father said she just decided she was tired of fighting, let herself slip away." He paused, then added quietly, "I think she would have liked you." The simple statement hit Clara harder than any grand declaration might have. This man barely knew her, yet he thought his beloved mother would have approved. It was a gift she hadn't expected, wasn't sure she deserved. "I'll try to be worthy of her book," Clara said, closing it carefully and holding it against her chest like a promise. The rest of the morning passed in a series of small lessons. Silas showed her how to bank the fire so it wouldn't die during the day, how to adjust the damper on the stove to control the heat, how to tell when the coffee was ready by the sound it made bubbling in the pot. Clara proved to be an eager if inexperienced student. She burned the first batch of biscuits she attempted, made the coffee so weak it was barely colored water, and managed to fill the cabin with smoke when she adjusted the damper the wrong way. But she listened carefully to Silas's gentle corrections and tried again, and by afternoon she had managed to produce something that resembled an edible meal. "Not bad for a first try," Silas said, gamely eating the slightly charred biscuit she'd set before him. "My first attempt at cooking lasted 3 days and nearly killed me with food poisoning." Clara laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had in months. "You're being kind. These biscuits could be used to patch holes in the roof." "Maybe the next batch," Silas agreed solemnly, which made her laugh again. As the day wore on, Clara found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't expected. There was something soothing about the rhythm of domestic tasks, the simple satisfaction of learning to do things with her hands. More than that, there was something healing about Silas's patient teaching and gentle humor. He never made her feel stupid for not knowing things that came naturally to him, never showed impatience or condescension, just taught her what she needed to know with the same care he'd probably shown building this cabin. Always patient, always kind, never rushed. By late afternoon, Clara was organizing the cabin's small pantry, making mental notes of what they had and what they'd need, arranging things in a way that made sense to her systematic mind. She was reaching for a jar on a high shelf when her hand brushed against something that didn't belong, a piece of paper, folded small and wedged behind the jars where it wouldn't be noticed unless someone was really looking. Curious, Clara worked it free. It was old. The paper yellowed with age, and as she unfolded it, something made her heart skip. Writing. Faded but legible, in a hand that wasn't Silas's. J.M. If you're reading this, the evidence is safe. The cabin will protect it. Trust the mountain man. He's the only one who can help. Clara read it twice. 3 times, her mind racing. J.M. Who was J.M.? And what evidence? She looked at the back of the pantry, at the jars and supplies that Silas had carefully arranged, suddenly seeing it all with new eyes. Someone had hidden something here, in this cabin, and whoever they were, they'd believed Silas would help them. Clara's hands trembled as she folded the note, her mind spinning with questions. Should she tell Silas? Should she search further? What if a scream split the afternoon air? Not human. Animal. Loud and far too close. Clara's heart stopped, then started again, hammering against her ribs. She dropped the note, grabbed the nearest thing that might serve as a weapon, a cast-iron pan from the stove. The scream came again. Closer. Through the window, Clara saw it. A bear. Massive and scarred and clearly hungry from a long winter. It had emerged from the tree line and was now lumbering toward the cabin with terrifying purpose. Clara's mind went blank with terror, then snapped into sharp focus. Silas was out checking his trap lines. Wouldn't be back for at least an hour, maybe more. She was alone, and that bear was getting closer. Everything Silas had taught her about the mountain came flooding back. His patient instructions during their ride up. If you ever see a bear, make yourself big. Make noise. Don't run. Whatever you do, don't run. Clara set down the pan, grabbed the larger pot she'd been using for coffee, stepped outside onto the porch. The bear stopped, lifted its head, scented the air. Clara raised the pot above her head, making herself as large as she could, and she banged the pot with the wooden spoon like her life depended on it. Because it did. "Hey!" she shouted, voice raw and loud and desperate. "Get out of here! Go!" The bear hesitated, swung its massive head toward her. Clara's entire body wanted to run, every instinct screaming at her to flee, to hide, to get away from those teeth and claws and certain death. But she held her ground, kept banging, kept shouting. The bear took a step forward. Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. But she didn't stop, didn't run, kept making noise, kept being big and loud and refusing to be prey. The bear took another step, then another. It was going to charge. Clara knew it with terrible certainty. All the noise in the world wasn't going to stop this hungry, desperate animal. She backed toward the cabin door. 1 step, 2, keeping eye contact, keeping the noise going. Her hand found the door handle. The bear lowered its head, the universal sign of a charge coming. Clara dove inside, slammed the door, threw the bolt just as the bear hit the porch with enough force to shake the entire cabin. She scrambled back, heart pounding, breath coming in gasps. The rifle. Where had Silas left the rifle? There, by the fireplace. Clara grabbed it with shaking hands. Had Silas loaded it? She didn't know, didn't have time to check properly, just brought it to her shoulder the way he'd shown her, aimed at the door, waiting. The bear hit the door again. Wood groaned, but held. Silas had built well. Through the window, Clara could see the massive animal pacing, frustrated, angry, looking for a way in. She kept the rifle trained on the door, barely breathing, waiting for the wood to splinter, for those claws to come through. Minutes passed like hours. Then, like a miracle, she heard it. Hoofbeats, fast, coming up the trail. "Clara!" Silas's voice, loud and urgent and the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. A gunshot. Not inside the cabin. Outside. Silas shooting into the air. The bear's attention swung away from the cabin, toward this new threat. Another shot. Clara couldn't see what was happening, could only hear the commotion outside. Silas shouting. The bear's angry roar. More shots. Then silence. Clara waited, still holding the rifle, still barely breathing. A knock. "Clara, it's me. You can open the door." She fumbled with the bolt, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip it. The door swung open and there was Silas, whole, unhurt, looking at her with an expression of such relief and concern it made her knees weak. "Are you all right?" he asked, already pulling her into his arms. Clara nodded against his chest, unable to speak, the rifle slipping from her nerveless fingers. "I heard you from half a mile away," Silas said, his voice rough. "The noise you were making. Knew something was wrong." "Bear," Clara managed. "I tried to scare it, but you did exactly right." Silas pulled back to look at her face, his hands on her shoulders. "Exactly right, Clara. Making noise, standing your ground. Most people would have panicked. I did panic. But you didn't run. That's what matters." He held her for a long moment, and Clara let herself lean into his strength, into the solid reality of him, alive, safe, here. When she finally pulled back, she saw the bear tracks in the dirt of the clearing, massive prints leading away into the forest. "Did you kill it?" she asked. "No, scared it off. It'll think twice before coming back here." Clara nodded, then suddenly remembered. "Silas, I found something, in the pantry. A note." His expression sharpened. "A note?" She retrieved it from where she'd dropped it, handed it to him with trembling fingers. Silas read it once, then again, his face going very still. "J.M.," he said quietly. "Jacob Morrison." "Who's Jacob Morrison?" "The night clerk at Fitzgerald's bank. He died 6 months ago." Silas looked up from the note. "This is his handwriting." Clara felt the pieces clicking into place. "He hid something here, evidence of something. And he knew I lived here, knew this cabin was empty most of the time." Silas's jaw tightened. What did he find out? And why hide it here? They spent the next hour searching the cabin systematically, looking behind every board, under every floorboard, in every corner and crevice. They found nothing. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, Clara and Silas sat at the table, the mysterious note between them, both lost in thought. "He said the cabin would protect it," Clara said. "Maybe he meant it literally. Something built into the structure. Maybe." Silas ran a hand through his hair. "Or maybe someone already found it. Morrison died 6 months ago. That's a long time." Clara didn't want to believe that, didn't want to think they'd been this close to answers and lost them. But the sun was setting, and they were both exhausted. The bear attack had drained Clara completely, left her shaking and tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. "We'll search more tomorrow," Silas said, reading her exhaustion. "For now, you need rest." Clara nodded, then surprised them both by reaching across the table to take his hand. "Thank you," she said, "for coming back when you did." "You saved yourself," Silas replied, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "I just scared off what you'd already fought." But they both knew that wasn't quite true. That night, Clara lay in bed listening to Silas moving around the main room, banking the fire, checking the locks, making the cabin secure, the domestic sounds of someone protecting their home. Their home, she realized. Not just his anymore. The mysterious note nagged at her. What had Jacob Morrison discovered? Why had he hidden evidence here, and where was it now? But exhaustion was pulling her under, the adrenaline crash leaving her boneless and heavy. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of Silas's face when he'd opened the door, the relief in his eyes, the careful way he'd held her, like she mattered, like losing her would have hurt him. The thought should have terrified her. This stranger she'd married, this man she barely knew, but instead it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Wanted. Clara Wynne Boone fell asleep with that warmth spreading through her chest, and for the first time since coming to the mountain she dreamed not of fear or uncertainty, but of home. 2 weeks passed like a dream Clara wasn't quite ready to wake from. She learned to start a fire without burning her fingers, learned which plants growing near the cabin were edible and which would make her sick, learned to read the weather in the way clouds gathered over the peaks and the way the wind changed direction before a storm. Most importantly, she learned to shoot. Every morning after coffee, Silas would set up tin cans on a fallen log 50 yards from the cabin, and Clara would practice until her shoulder ached from the rifle's kick and her ears rang from the reports echoing off the mountainsides. She was getting good. Better than good, actually. Her hands were steady, her eye was sharp, and she had the kind of focus that came from understanding that her life might depend on this skill. "You're a natural," Silas said one morning, watching her hit 3 cans in a row without missing. "Got the hands of a surgeon and the eye of a hawk." Clara lowered the rifle, a smile tugging at her lips. "I had a good teacher." "Maybe, but talent like this can't be taught. You've either got it or you don't." He stepped closer, adjusted her stance slightly, his hands on her shoulders warm even through her shirt. "And you've got it." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. In 2 weeks, she'd transformed from helpless city girl to someone who could defend herself, could contribute, could be a partner instead of a burden. Her hands were calloused now, her city-soft skin replaced by the rough texture of work and survival. The delicate shoes she'd worn to her forced wedding sat abandoned in a corner of the bedroom, replaced by sturdy boots Silas had crafted from elk hide. They fit her perfectly, molded to her feet like they'd been made just for her, because they had been. She'd watched him make them over 3 evenings, his large hands working the leather with surprising delicacy, measuring twice, cutting once, stitching with the same care he brought to everything he built. "For you," he'd said simply, presenting them to her like they were glass slippers instead of practical mountain boots. Clara had nearly cried. Now she wore them everywhere, a constant reminder that she was becoming something new, someone new. Mrs. Clara Boone, mountain woman, survivor. She was reloading the rifle for another round of practice when she heard it. Hoofbeats, coming up the trail, fast. Silas heard them too. His entire body went still, alert, the way a wolf goes motionless when it scents danger. "Inside," he said quietly. "Take the rifle. Cover the door." Clara didn't argue, didn't waste time asking questions, just moved, quick and efficient, the way he'd taught her. She positioned herself at the window, rifle loaded and ready, heart hammering but hands steady, watching as a single rider emerged from the tree line. A girl. No, a young woman, riding hard, looking over her shoulder like something was chasing her. "Hold," Silas said from the porch, his own rifle raised but not aimed. "State your business." The rider pulled up hard, her horse breathing heavily, foam on its flanks from being pushed too fast up the mountain trail. Clara's breath caught. She recognized that face. Had seen it crying at the altar 2 weeks ago. Sarah Morrison, the girl who'd been matched with the rancher, married off to pay her father's debts, just like Clara had almost been. "Please," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help." Silas didn't lower his rifle. "Help how?" "Fitzgerald." Sarah's eyes darted to the cabin, to Clara watching from the window. "He's gathering men, spreading stories that Mrs. Boone was kidnapped, that you forced her to marry you." Clara stepped onto the porch, rifle still in hand but lowered. "How do you know this?" Sarah's eyes widened at the sight of Clara armed and competent. This was not the helpless woman she'd seen at the altar. My husband does business in town. He hears things. And Fitzgerald. He's not being quiet about it." "What exactly is he saying?" Silas asked. "That Clara was taken against her will by a dangerous fugitive, that she's being held captive on the mountain, that any man who brings her back safely will receive $500. The number made Clara's stomach drop. $500. A fortune. More money than most people in Cedar Falls would see in a year. "He's put out wanted posters," Sarah continued, her words tumbling over each other in her urgency. "With your face, Mrs. Boone, says you were kidnapped, that Mr. Boone is a known killer." Silas's jaw tightened, but he didn't look surprised. "When? 3 days ago. They're already in every town within 100 miles. Bounty hunters will be coming, maybe already on their way." Clara felt cold despite the warm morning sun. "Why are you telling us this?" Sarah looked directly at her then, and Clara saw something in the girl's eyes. Kinship, maybe, or shared understanding. "Because you did what I couldn't," Sarah said quietly. "You escaped him." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. "I'm sorry," Clara said, "about your father, about your marriage, about all of it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "My husband is kind. He doesn't hurt me. That's more than some girls get." She paused. "But before my father died, he told me something. Said he'd left something important, something that could help someone who needed it." Clara's pulse quickened. "What kind of something?" "He didn't say exactly. Just told me it was hidden somewhere safe, somewhere Fitzgerald would never think to look." Sarah's eyes moved to the cabin. "He mentioned a mountain man once. Said if anything happened to him, the mountain man would know what to do." Silas and Clara exchanged glances. "The note," Clara said. "What note?" Sarah asked. Clara retrieved it from inside the cabin, handed it to Sarah with careful hands, watched as the girl read her dead father's writing. Sarah's face crumpled. "That's his hand. His writing." She looked up. "You found this here?" "In the pantry," Clara confirmed. "Hidden behind some jars. We've searched but haven't found anything else yet." "He was careful," Sarah said, a sad smile touching her lips. "My father, he worked for Fitzgerald for 20 years, night clerk at the bank. Everyone thought he was just a harmless old man who cleaned the offices and kept the ledgers tidy." "But he wasn't harmless," Silas said. "No, he noticed things, wrote things down. He told me once that Fitzgerald thought he was invisible, that rich men never really see the people who serve them." Sarah folded the note carefully. "He said that was their weakness, that someday all those things he'd noticed would matter." "What kinds of things?" Clara asked. "I don't know exactly. He wouldn't tell me. Said it was safer if I didn't know." Sarah's voice broke. "He died 6 months ago. Heart attack, the doctor said. But my father's heart was strong. He was only 67. The implication hung unspoken between them. "You think Fitzgerald killed him," Clara said. "I think my father knew something that Fitzgerald couldn't let him share." Sarah handed the note back. "If he hid evidence here, it's because he trusted Mr. Boone to use it, even though they'd never met." "Why would he trust me?" Silas asked. "The whole territory thinks I'm a murderer." "Because my father knew your father," Sarah said simply. "They were friends when they were young, before the Kellermans, before everything went bad." She paused. "He used to tell me about John Boone, said he was the most honest man he'd ever known, said the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." Silas looked away, and Clara saw something in his expression, grief maybe, or the weight of a legacy he'd been carrying alone for too long. "I have to go," Sarah said, standing in her stirrups. "If I'm gone too long, my husband will worry. He's good to me. But he's also friends with Fitzgerald. I can't let him know I came here." "Sarah," Clara called as the girl turned her horse. "Thank you. For warning us. For risking this." Sarah looked back, and for just a moment Clara saw past the frightened girl to someone stronger underneath. someone who'd learned to survive in her own way. "Find what my father left," Sarah said. "Whatever it is, he died protecting it. Don't let that be for nothing." Then she was gone, riding back down the mountain as fast as she'd come, leaving Clara and Silas standing in the clearing with the weight of new knowledge settling over them like snow. $500, Clara said quietly. "That's a lot of money." "Enough to bring every bounty hunter and desperate man in 3 territories," Silas agreed. "We have maybe a week, maybe less. Before they come." Before they come. Clara looked at the cabin, at the home they'd been building together, at the life that had started to feel real and possible. "We could run," she said, "go deeper into the wilderness, somewhere they'd never find us." Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to face her fully. "Is that what you want?" Clara thought about it, really thought. Running meant safety, but it also meant living as fugitives forever, always looking over their shoulders, always one step ahead of the law. "No," she said finally. "I'm tired of running, tired of hiding. If we have evidence that can expose Fitzgerald, we should use it. It could get us killed. Living on our knees gets us killed too, just slower." Something in Silas's expression shifted, softened. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that had become familiar over the past 2 weeks. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." "Then we'd better find what Morrison left us," Silas said, "before Fitzgerald's hired guns come looking." They spent the rest of the day searching the cabin with renewed purpose. Not randomly this time, but systematically. Thinking like Jacob Morrison would have thought, where would a careful, methodical man hide something he wanted to keep safe? Clara worked through the logic out loud. He was a clerk, someone who organized things, put them in their proper places. So he'd hide evidence somewhere it looked natural, Silas added. Somewhere it belonged. The pantry makes sense for papers, documents. They'd blend in with receipts and household records. They returned to the pantry, pulled everything out, examined every board and jar and container. Nothing. The sun was setting when Clara sat back on her heels, frustrated, exhausted. Maybe someone already found it. Maybe we're too late. Or maybe we're looking in the wrong place, Silas said. He was staring at the wall, the bare boards now that they'd removed everything. Morrison said the cabin would protect it. "We've checked every wall, every floorboard. Have we—" Silas ran his hand along the paneling, frowning. "This board here, it's newer than the others. See, different color, different grain." Clara looked closer. He was right. One board in the back of the pantry was clearly newer, had been replaced recently. Her heart started to pound. Silas carefully pried at the board. It came loose easily, too easily, like it had been designed to be removed and replaced. Behind it was a hollow space in the wall, and in that space was a leather satchel. Clara's hands shook as she pulled it out. The leather was good quality, well made, and heavy with whatever was inside. "Open it," Silas said. Clara undid the buckles with trembling fingers. Inside she found papers, lots of papers, ledgers, letters, documents with official seals, all carefully organized and annotated in the same neat handwriting as the note. Jacob Morrison's handwriting. On top was a letter, addressed to Silas. Clara handed it to him, watched his face as he read. "What does it say?" she asked when he'd finished. Silas looked up, and Clara saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Cold fury mixed with vindication. "It says that Harold Fitzgerald has been embezzling from the town's emergency fund for 15 years, that he's foreclosed on properties that weren't actually in default, made loans that were never actually disbursed but still collected on." Silas's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "And it says he funded the Kellermans." Clara's breath stopped. "What?" "3 weeks before they attacked my family, Fitzgerald made a loan to Jeremiah Kellerman for $5,000, purpose listed as land acquisition." Silas looked at the documents, then at Clara. "My land. He wanted my land. And when my father refused to sell, Fitzgerald paid the Kellermans to force the issue. The implications crashed over Clara like a wave. He's been your enemy all along. For 10 years I thought I was just unlucky. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong enemies. Silas's voice was hollow. But it was orchestrated. All of it. The attack, the exile, everything. Clara moved to his side, put her hand on his arm. What else does it say? Silas read further, his expression growing darker with each page. Morrison discovered that Fitzgerald had been investigating my land. Survey reports, water table assessments. He wanted it because there's an underground spring, feeds the entire Eastern Valley, controls the water, controls everything. That's when the final piece clicked for Clara. My father. Silas looked up. My father discovered the embezzlement, Clara said, the certainty settling over her like ice. That's why Fitzgerald killed him, not because of the debts, because father threatened to expose him. She grabbed the papers, searching frantically, and there it was, a letter, in Fitzgerald's distinctive handwriting, addressed to Thomas Wynne, dated the night before her father died. Thomas, it read, your continued refusal to accept my generous offer leaves me no choice but to take more direct action. The debts you owe are real, and the consequences of non-payment are severe. Meet me at the old mining office tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. Come alone and we can discuss a final settlement. Fail to appear, and I will be forced to collect in ways that may prove unpleasant for all concerned. The letter was stained with something dark. Blood, Clara realized, her father's blood. She dropped it, backed away, hands covering her mouth. He killed him, she whispered. Fitzgerald murdered my father. Silas was beside her immediately, arms around her, holding her while she shook with rage and grief and terrible understanding. My father didn't die of fever, Clara said against his chest. He died fighting. He died trying to do the right thing. I know. And Morrison. He found out, gathered all this evidence, and Fitzgerald killed him too. I know. Clara pulled back, looked up at Silas with tears streaming down her face. We have to stop him. We will. No, you don't understand. Clara's voice was fierce now, determined. We can't just hide this evidence. We can't wait for the law to find us. We have to take it to them. We have to make sure everyone knows what he is. Clara, that means going back to Cedar Falls, walking right into his power base. It's suicide. It's justice. She gripped his arms. Morrison died gathering this. My father died threatening to expose it. How many others has Fitzgerald destroyed? How many more will he hurt if we don't stop him? Silas studied her face, and Clara saw the moment he made his decision, saw the mountain man who'd spent 10 years hiding choose to fight instead. All right, he said. We'll fight, but we do it smart. We prepare, and we make damn sure we survive to see him pay. Clara nodded, then surprised them both by rising on her toes and kissing him. Brief, but intense. A promise and a commitment all in one. When she pulled back, Silas was staring at her with something like wonder. What was that for? For believing me, Clara said. For choosing to fight instead of run. For being the man your father raised you to be. Something in Silas's expression cracked, opened. He pulled her close again. And this time when they kissed, it was slower, deeper, full of all the things they hadn't yet said, but both felt. When they finally broke apart, the sun had set completely. The cabin was dark except for the firelight, and outside the mountain wind carried the promise of change. They'll be coming soon, Silas said. Fitzgerald's men, the marshals, maybe bounty hunters. How long? Days. Maybe a week if we're lucky. Clara looked at the evidence spread across the table, at the proof of Fitzgerald's crimes, at her father's blood on that final letter. Then we'd better get ready, she said. And for the first time since her father's death, Clara felt something besides grief and fear. She felt fury and purpose and the cold determination of someone who'd finally found something worth fighting for. Dawn came cold and sharp. Clara woke to find Silas already up, already working. He'd dragged a heavy trunk from the storage room and was sorting through its contents with methodical precision. Weapons, ammunition, supplies. "Coffee's on the stove," he said without looking up. "We've got work to do." Clara poured herself a cup, watched him organize cartridges and gunpowder with the same careful attention he brought to everything. "What's the plan?" "If they're coming, we need to be ready. This cabin's got good bones, solid walls, limited approaches. We can defend it if we're smart." He looked up. "But only if you're willing to fight." "I'm willing. I don't mean scare off a bear." Silas's voice was serious. "I mean shoot at men who are shooting back, men with families, men who might just be desperate for money and don't know they're serving evil." Clara thought about that, really thought. Could she take a human life? Then she thought about her father's blood on that letter, about Sarah Morrison crying at the altar, about all the people Fitzgerald had destroyed. "If they come here to hurt us," she said slowly, "if they come to drag me back to Fitzgerald or kill you for defending me, then yes, I can fight. I can kill if I have to." Silas studied her face, then nodded. "All right. Then let's make sure you know how." The training that followed was nothing like their casual morning target practice. This was combat, real combat, the kind that kept you alive when men with rifles were trying to kill you. Silas taught her to reload without looking, to judge distance by eye, to compensate for wind and elevation. He showed her firing positions around the cabin, explained sight lines and fields of fire and how to minimize exposure while maintaining coverage. "3 approaches to this cabin," he said, sketching a rough map in the dirt. "Main trail from the south, game path from the east, rocky scramble from the west, north sides protected by a sheer cliff. Nothing's coming that way." Clara studied the map. "So we watch 3 directions." "We watch 3 directions. I'll take south and west. You take east." "What if they split up? Come from multiple angles. Then we fall back to the cabin, use the walls for cover, make them come to us on our terms." Silas looked at her. "Can you do that? Stay calm under fire? Think instead of panic." Clara remembered the bear, remembered making herself big and loud when every instinct screamed at her to run. "I can do that." "Good." They spent the next 3 days fortifying their position. Silas built rifle rests at key windows, stockpiled ammunition at each position, created escape routes and fallback points. He taught Clara how to read the forest for signs of approach, broken branches, disturbed earth, the way birds went silent when humans moved through their territory. "The mountain will warn us," he said, "if you know how to listen." Clara learned to listen, but more than that she learned to shoot, not at stationary cans anymore, at moving targets. Silas would throw objects in the air and she'd track them. Adjust. Fire. Her accuracy improved by the day, by the hour. "You're good at this," Silas said after she hit 3 thrown targets in a row. "Better than good." "I had a good teacher." "No, this is more than teaching. This is talent." He lowered his own rifle. "You've got steady hands and a calm mind. Most people fall apart under pressure. You get sharper." Clara thought about the bear again, about facing down death and choosing to fight instead of flee. Maybe Silas was right. Maybe she did have this in her blood. "My father used to say I was too stubborn for my own good," she said, loading fresh cartridges. Maybe stubbornness is just another word for survival. Maybe it is. The evenings were different than training, quieter, more intimate. They'd sit by the fire after dinner. Silas would work on some project while Clara read from his mother's cookbook or practiced mending clothes by lamplight. Domestic tasks that felt strange and right all at once. Sometimes they talked about their pasts, their fears, the future that might or might not come. "Tell me about Mary," Clara said one night. Silas's hands stilled on the leather he was working. "Why?" "Because she was part of your life. And I want to understand." He was quiet for so long Clara thought he might refuse. Then he began to speak. I met her at a barn dance. She was 17, prettiest girl I'd ever seen, laughed at all my jokes even when they weren't funny, made me feel like I was worth something. Clara heard the old pain in his voice, but also fondness. What was she like? Kind, gentle. She loved music and flowers and Sunday services, everything soft and civilized. Silas looked up, met Clara's eyes. She married a man who worked with his hands and came home tired but clean, who built things instead of destroying them. And then the Kellermans came. And then the Kellermans came. Silas's jaw tightened. The night of the fight, I came home covered in blood, shaking. I'd killed 3 men, defended my father and our land and everything I thought mattered. What did she say? Nothing at first, just looked at me, like she was seeing a stranger, like the man she married had died out there and been replaced by something else. But you were the same man. Was I? Silas asked. I'd taken lives. I'd crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Maybe she was right to be afraid. She was wrong, Clara said firmly. You defended your family. That doesn't make you a monster. It makes you a man. Silas looked at her with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. You really believe that? I really believe that. He set aside his work, moved to sit beside her on the bench, close enough that their shoulders touched. You're not like her, not like anyone I've known. Is that good or bad? It's everything. His hand found hers, rough calluses against her own newly earned calluses. Mary needed me to be safe, predictable, a man who fit into her idea of what a husband should be. And I don't need that. You need a partner, someone who sees you as an equal, someone who trusts you to stand beside them instead of behind them. Silas turned to face her fully. And that's what you've become, Clara. My partner, my equal, the person I trust most in this world. The words hit Clara harder than she'd expected. In 3 weeks she'd gone from helpless debtor to warrior, from victim to fighter. And this man saw her not as something to protect, but as someone to fight alongside. I'm afraid, she admitted, of what's coming, of failing, of not being strong enough when it matters. Fear's not weakness. Fear's smart. It keeps you alive. Silas squeezed her hand. But I've watched you face down a bear, learn to shoot like you were born to it, transform yourself from city girl to mountain woman in less than a month. If anyone can survive what's coming, it's you. Us, Clara corrected. If anyone can survive, it's us. Us, Silas agreed. And then he kissed her. It was different from the kiss at the altar, different even from the quick kiss they'd shared after finding Morrison's evidence. This was slow, deep, full of promise and heat and the kind of longing that had been building between them since the day they met. Clara kissed him back with everything she had, poured all her fear and determination and growing love into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. I didn't think I'd ever feel this again, he said. This connection, this need, neither did I. If we survive what's coming, when we survive, Clara interrupted. When we survive, Silas corrected with a small smile. I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, give you the marriage you deserve instead of the desperate bargain we started with. Clara pulled back to look at him. Silas Boone, are you asking to court the woman you're already married to? I suppose I am. She laughed, the sound surprising them both in its genuine joy. Then I accept, though I should warn you I'm a very demanding courting prospect. I'll take my chances. They sat together by the fire until it burned low, talking quietly, making plans for a future that might never come but felt real enough to fight for. When Clara finally retired to the bedroom, their bedroom, she was starting to think of it. She lay in the darkness, thinking about everything that had changed. 3 weeks ago she'd been standing at an altar waiting to be sold to a man she despised. Now she was lying in a mountain cabin preparing to fight for justice, alongside a man she was falling in love with. The transformation should have felt impossible, should have taken years, not weeks. But the mountain had a way of burning away everything that wasn't essential. And what was left was the truth, the core of who you really were when all the civilized polish was stripped away. Clara Wynne had been educated and accomplished and utterly useless when it mattered. Clara Boone was learning to be fierce and capable and exactly the person she needed to be to survive. And somewhere between those two women, she'd found herself. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of coming weather. A storm was building over the peaks, would likely hit by morning. But inside the cabin, protected by solid walls and the presence of a man who'd sworn to stand beside her, Clara felt safer than she'd felt in years. The evidence was hidden, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked into a waterproof bag that Silas had prepared, ready to be carried down the mountain when the time came. The rifles were loaded, the ammunition stockpiled, the defenses prepared. All they could do now was wait, and hope that when Fitzgerald's men came, and they would come 3 weeks of training and a mountain cabin's strong walls would be enough to keep them alive. Clara closed her eyes, let exhaustion pull her under. Her last thought before sleep was of Silas's hands on her face, his voice saying partner and equal and meaning every word. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone, and that made all the difference. The storm broke just after midnight. Rain hammered the cabin's roof like bullets. Thunder rolled across the peaks. Lightning turned the world outside the windows into sharp flashes of white and black. No gray, no middle ground, just extremes. Clara lay in bed listening to the storm, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Silas was in the main room. She could hear him moving around, checking the windows, feeding the fire, keeping watch, always keeping watch. She rose, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, found him standing at the south-facing window, rifle in hand, eyes on the trail barely visible through the rain. "Can't sleep?" he asked without turning. "Neither can you." "No." Clara moved to stand beside him. "They won't come in this weather." "Probably not, but maybe." Silas glanced at her. "Smart men wait out the storm. Desperate men use it as cover." "Which kind do you think Fitzgerald hired?" "Both." They stood together in silence, watching the storm, waiting for something neither of them could name. "I've been thinking about the evidence," Clara said. "About what we'll do with it. We take it to Judge Harrison. He's circuit judge for this territory. Comes through Cedar Falls twice a year. Should be there now. And if Fitzgerald gets to him first, then we make it public another way. Give it to the newspaper. Read it aloud in the town square. Whatever it takes to make sure people know the truth." Clara nodded, but something still nagged at her. "Silas." "Yeah. Why did Morrison trust you? I mean, I understand about your father, but Morrison had never met you. For all he knew, you really were the beast they said you were." Silas was quiet for a long moment. "I've wondered that too. And I think maybe he recognized something, that sometimes good men have to do bad things, that the world isn't as simple as people want it to be." Silas set down his rifle, turned to face her. "Or maybe he was just desperate and I was his only option. I don't think so. I think he saw what I see. A man who'd rather live alone on a mountain than compromise his principles. A man who'd give up everything he had to save a stranger." Clara reached up, touched his bearded face. "A good man." Silas caught her hand, pressed it against his cheek. "I'm not sure I deserve that faith." "You don't have to be sure. I'm sure enough for both of us." He kissed her palm, then her wrist, then pulled her close and kissed her properly, deep and slow and full of everything they hadn't yet said. When they broke apart, the storm was still raging, but inside the cabin something had settled, solidified. They were in this together, whatever came. "Go back to bed," Silas said gently. "I'll wake you if anything changes." "I'd rather stay with you." "Then stay." So Clara did, curled up in the chair by the window, wrapped in her shawl and watching the storm with the man who'd become her anchor in a world gone mad. She must have dozed, because when she opened her eyes, gray dawn was breaking and the storm had passed. Silas was still at the window, still watching. "Anything?" she asked. "No." Storm kept everyone honest. Clara stretched, winced at the stiffness in her back from sleeping in the chair. "I'll make coffee. I'll keep watch." It was while she was grinding the beans, a task she could now do with her eyes closed, that she heard it. Silas's sudden intake of breath, the quiet curse that followed. "What?" Clara dropped the grinder, moved to the window. He handed her the spyglass, pointed. 2 miles out. 3 riders, maybe 4. Clara looked. It took her a moment to find them, but there they were, moving slowly up the muddy trail, picking their way carefully around storm damage. Her heart started to pound. "Marshals?" she asked. "Maybe. Or bounty hunters. Hard to tell at this distance." Silas took back the spyglass. "But they're coming here, no question." "How long?" "An hour. Maybe less, depending on how bad the trail is." Clara's mind raced. An hour. They had an hour to prepare, to decide how to handle this. Fight or negotiate. Trust the law or assume everyone was Fitzgerald's creature. "What do we do?" she asked. Silas was already moving, checking rifles, loading fresh ammunition. "We get ready, take our positions, and we see what they want. And if they want me, then they'll have to go through me to get you." Clara grabbed his arm. "Silas, we can't kill lawmen, even if they're working for Fitzgerald. That would make us fugitives for real." "I know." His jaw was tight. "But I won't let them take you either. So, what's the middle ground?" He looked at her, and Clara saw the war behind his eyes, protecting her versus doing what was right. The beast versus the builder. Everything he'd been struggling with for 10 years. "We try to talk first," he said finally. "Show them you're here willingly, that this isn't kidnapping. Maybe that's enough. And if it's not, then we fall back to plan B, which is, we figure it out as we go." Not the most reassuring answer, but Clara supposed it was the only honest one. They spent the next 45 minutes in frantic preparation. Clara took her position at the east window, rifle loaded, extra ammunition within reach, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Silas was at the south window, watching the trail, narrating what he saw. 3 men definitely, maybe a 4th hanging back. Can't tell yet. Clara's palms were sweating. She wiped them on her pants, checked her rifle for the 3rd time, tried to steady her breathing. This was it, the moment all their preparation had been leading toward. "They're close enough to see now," Silas called. "Lead man's wearing a badge. Deputy Marshal looks like. 2 others are guns for hire, can tell by the way they move. What do? We wait, see what they want, stay calm." Easier said than done. The riders came into clear view. Clara could see them now without the spyglass. 3 men on horseback. The leader was lean, middle-aged, sitting his saddle with the confidence of someone who'd worn a badge for years. Behind him rode 2 younger men, hard-eyed, hands resting casually near their guns. Not lawmen, hired muscle. They stopped 50 yards from the cabin. The marshal looked up, studied the windows, the strong walls, the limited approaches. He was smart enough to be cautious. "Hello, the house," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "I'm Deputy Marshal Carter, looking for information about a missing woman, Clara Wynne. Her family's awful worried about her." Silas remained silent, watching, waiting. Carter tried again. "We know someone's up here. Saw smoke from your chimney. Just want to ask a few questions. Make sure the lady's all right." Still silence from the cabin. "Listen," Carter said, an edge creeping into his voice. "We can do this easy or hard, your choice. But we're not leaving until we talk to Clara Wynne." That was when Clara made her decision. She stood, moved to the window where Carter could see her. Silas tried to pull her back, but she shook him off. "I'm Clara Wynne," she called, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Or I was. I'm Clara Boone now." Carter's eyes widened. He clearly hadn't expected her to speak for herself. "Mrs. Wynne, your family reported you missing, said you were taken by force by Silas Boone." "My family is dead, Marshal Carter. My father died 6 months ago. I have no other family." Clara kept her voice level. "The only person who reported me missing is Harold Fitzgerald, and his concern has nothing to do with my welfare." "Ma'am, we have reports suggesting you were coerced, forced into marriage." "Then your reports are wrong." Clara raised her left hand, showed them the silver ring Silas had made. "I married Mr. Boone of my own free will. I'm here by choice, and I'd appreciate it if you'd leave my property now." One of the hired guns snorted. "She's been up here 3 weeks. Who knows what he's done to her, what he's threatened?" Clara felt anger flash hot in her chest. "What he's done is treat me with more respect than any man in Cedar Falls ever showed. What he's done is give me a home and a future. If you're concerned for my welfare, you can express that concern by leaving, now." Carter studied her, really looked. And Clara saw the moment something shifted in his expression. This wasn't what he'd expected. A terrified captive begging for rescue would have confirmed Fitzgerald's story. But a confident woman defending her home and her husband, that was harder to ignore. "Mrs. Boone," Carter said carefully, "if you're here willingly, just come out and talk to us, face to face, so we can see you're all right." "So you can drag me back to Cedar Falls?" Clara shook her head. "I don't think so, Marshal. We just want to—" "I know what you want. Fitzgerald's paying you to bring me back. $500, isn't it? That's a lot of money for doing a banker's dirty work." Carter's face flushed. "Now you wait just a minute." "No, you wait." Clara's voice cut through his protest. "I'm a married woman standing in my own home. I've broken no laws, harmed no one, and you have no right to be here." The hired gun on the left was drifting toward the cabin's blind spot. Clara saw it, tracked him with her eyes. "Tell your man to stop moving," she said quietly, "or I'll stop him myself." The gun hesitated, looked at Carter. The marshal raised a hand. "Hold position." "I'm not some helpless girl who needs rescuing," Clara continued. "I'm armed, trained, and perfectly capable of defending my home. If you try to approach this cabin, I will consider it an attack, and I will respond accordingly." Silas appeared beside her at the window, rifle visible, silent support. Carter looked at them both, at the solid cabin, at the limited approaches, at 2 people clearly willing to fight. He was a smart enough lawman to recognize a losing position when he saw one. "All right, Mrs. Boone," he said finally. "You've made your position clear, but this isn't over. Fitzgerald's got friends in high places, money, influence. He's not going to let this go." "Then let him come himself," Clara said, "instead of sending hired guns to do his fighting." Carter's lips twitched. Might have been a smile, might have been respect. "You're playing a dangerous game." "I'm living my life, Marshal. There's a difference." The marshal gathered his reins, gestured to his men. "All right, boys, we're done here." "But—" one of the hired guns started to protest. "I said we're done." Carter's voice was iron. "The lady's spoken her piece, and she's not wrong about the law. We've got no grounds to force entry." The hired guns looked mutinous, but they followed orders. The 3 men turned their horses, started back down the trail, but before they disappeared from view, Carter looked back over his shoulder, met Clara's eyes through the window, and nodded. Once. Brief, but unmistakable. Acknowledgement, maybe even approval. Then they were gone, swallowed by the forest, leaving Clara and Silas alone in the sudden silence. Clara's legs gave out. She sat down hard, the rifle clattering to the floor. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. "That," Silas said quietly, "was magnificent. That was terrifying. It was both." He knelt beside her, took her shaking hands in his steady ones. "But you did it. You stood up to them. Spoke for yourself. For us. They'll be back. Probably. With more men. Better plans." Silas squeezed her hands. "But you bought us time, and you showed them this isn't what Fitzgerald claimed. That's worth something." Clara nodded, her heart still racing. "Did you see the way Carter looked at me at the end?" "I saw. He didn't believe Fitzgerald's story, not after talking to me." "No, he didn't." That was something. Maybe not enough, but something. Clara stood on shaking legs, moved to the window, watched the empty trail where the marshals had disappeared. "Silas?" "Yeah. When this is over, when we've exposed Fitzgerald and cleared your name and made sure everyone knows the truth." She turned to face him. "Can we come back here, to this cabin, to this life?" Silas crossed to her, pulled her into his arms, held her like she was something precious. "This cabin isn't going anywhere, and neither am I. We finish what we started, then we come home." Clara buried her face in his chest, breathed in the scent of wood smoke and pine and safety. "Promise." "I promise." They stood together in the morning light, two people who'd started as strangers and become partners, who'd found something worth fighting for in each other. Outside, the mountain was silent. The storm had passed. The marshals were gone. But Clara knew this was just the beginning. The real battle was still to come. 3 days after the marshals left, Clara woke to find Silas already gone from the cabin. This wasn't unusual. He often rose before dawn to check the trap lines or hunt for fresh meat. But something about this morning felt different. The air held a strange quality, like the world was holding its breath. She dressed quickly, found coffee already made and still hot, a note beside the pot in Silas's careful handwriting. "Gone to the South Ridge. Back by noon. Don't worry. Don't worry." As if that were possible. Clara poured coffee and moved to the window. The morning was clear and cold. Frost sparkled on the pine needles. The peaks were dusted with fresh snow that hadn't been there yesterday. Fall was giving way to winter. Soon the high passes would be impassable. Soon they'd be trapped here until spring. If they were going to act, it had to be soon. She was contemplating this when she heard hoofbeats. Her hand moved instinctively to the rifle by the door. But it was Silas, riding up the trail with something bulky tied to his saddle. Clara stepped onto the porch, watched him dismount and begin untying whatever he'd brought. It looked like a deer. No, an elk. A young bull by the size of the antlers. "You've been hunting," she said. "Had to go pretty far to find this one. Elk are moving to lower elevations already. Winter's coming early this year." He hauled the carcass toward the meat shed. "Give me an hour to dress this and I'll have steaks for lunch." Clara helped him hang the elk, held tools while he worked with the efficiency of long practice. His hands were steady as always, but there was something in his manner, a nervous energy she'd never seen before. "What is it?" she asked. "What do you mean? You're fidgeting. You never fidget." Silas paused, looked at her, then set down his knife and wiped his hands on a cloth. "I made you something." "Another something." Clara gestured at the elk. "This seems like plenty." "Not this." He reached into his coat, pulled out a small cloth bundle, unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a ring. Simple, elegant, fashioned from what looked like silver but had the duller gleam of mountain ore. The band was smooth, unadorned except for a single detail, a tiny pine cone etched into the metal. So small Clara might have missed it if she wasn't looking closely. "I know we're already married," Silas said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "But that was desperation, necessity. This is—" He paused, searching for words. "This is choice." Clara's throat tightened. She couldn't speak. "I found silver ore up on the South Ridge. Been working on this for the past week, every evening after you went to bed." He held the ring up to the light. "It's not fancy, not like something you'd get in a jewelry store, but it's real, and it's ours." "Silas, let me finish." He took her left hand, the one that had been bare since the hasty church ceremony. "Clara Boone, I choose you, not because Fitzgerald was forcing you into marriage, not because I needed to save you or you needed to escape. I choose you because you're brave and fierce and you've made this mountain feel like home for the first time in 10 years. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like he'd measured her hand while she slept, which he probably had. "I choose you every day," Silas continued, "for the rest of my life, however long or short that might be." Clara looked at the ring, at the careful craftsmanship, the hours of work by firelight, the thought and care that had gone into something so simple and so perfect. Then she looked at the man who'd made it, the mountain man who'd walked into a church and kissed a stranger, who'd spent his life's savings to buy her freedom, who'd taught her to shoot and to survive and to believe she was worth fighting for. "I choose you too," she whispered. "Not because I have to, because I want to, because you see me as I am, and you don't ask me to be anything else." She pulled him close, kissed him with everything she had, poured all her fear and determination and growing love into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this again," he said. "This connection, this need." "Neither did I." "If we survive what's coming, when we survive," Clara interrupted. The correction had become ritual between them. "When we survive," Silas amended with a small smile. "I want to do this right. Build a real life with you, not just surviving, but living." Clara looked at the ring on her finger, at the cabin they'd defended together, at the mountain that had become home. "We're already living," she said. "Every day we choose this, choose each other. That's more real than any ceremony." Silas cupped her face in his calloused hands, looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're sure about going back? About fighting Fitzgerald? We could still run. Go deeper into the wilderness. They'd never find us." "I'm sure. It could get us killed. Living on our knees gets us killed too, just slower." Clara covered his hands with her own. "Morrison died gathering that evidence. My father died trying to expose Fitzgerald. If we run now, their deaths meant nothing." "All right." Silas took a deep breath. "Then we fight. But we do it smart. And we make damn sure we come back to this mountain. Together. Together." They finished butchering the elk in companionable silence. Clara had learned the work over the past weeks, could now skin and quarter an animal without flinching. Her city-soft squeamishness burned away by necessity and practice. As they worked, she thought about how much she'd changed. The girl who'd stood at that altar 3 weeks ago wouldn't recognize the woman she'd become. That Clara had been afraid of everything. Powerless. Dependent. This Clara could defend herself, could provide for herself, could stand beside a man as his equal instead of hiding behind him. The transformation should have taken years, but the mountain had a way of burning away everything that wasn't essential. What remained was the truth, the core of who you really were. They hung the meat to cure, saved the best cuts for dinner. Clara was washing blood from her hands when Silas spoke again. "Tonight," he said quietly, "after dinner, I want to show you something." "What?" "You'll see." Clara had learned that Silas didn't make promises he couldn't keep, so she simply nodded, finished cleaning up, and spent the afternoon in nervous anticipation. Dinner was elk steaks and root vegetables from their stores, simple food. But Clara had learned to cook it well. Silas ate with genuine appreciation, praised her seasoning, made her feel like the meal was something special instead of basic survival. After they cleaned up, he took her hand, led her outside into the gathering dusk. "Where are we going?" "Not far." He brought her to the south side of the cabin, to a spot where the porch caught the last rays of sunlight, where you could see the peaks turning gold and pink as the sun set. 2 chairs were arranged there, positioned to watch the view. Between them was a small table, and on the table was something covered with cloth. "Sit," Silas said. Clara sat, watched as he uncovered what he'd hidden: a bottle, 2 tin cups, and a small wooden box. "That's whiskey," Clara said, recognizing the amber liquid. "Good whiskey. Been saving it for a special occasion." Silas poured 2 measures, handed her one. "Seemed like tonight qualified. What are we celebrating?" "Us. This. The fact that we're still alive and still fighting." He raised his cup. "To partnership." "To partnership," Clara echoed. The whiskey burned going down, made her eyes water, but it also spread warmth through her chest, loosened something that had been tight for weeks. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the mountains. The sky turned from blue to purple to deep indigo. Stars began to emerge, more stars than Clara had ever seen in her life, the mountain sky unobscured by city lights or smoke. "I used to sit here every night," Silas said quietly, "for years, watching the sunset alone, convinced I'd die alone, that this was all I deserved. And now I can't imagine being here without you." He set down his cup, opened the wooden box. Inside was a simple silver chain. "This was my mother's, one of the few things I have left of her." He lifted it carefully. Clara saw a small locket attached to the chain, old, well-worn, precious. "She wore this every day of her life," Silas continued, "even when we had nothing, even when times were hardest. She said it reminded her why she was fighting, what she was building." He opened the locket. Inside was a tiny painting, a man and a woman, young, smiling, clearly in love. "Your parents," Clara breathed, "on their wedding day, before the frontier, before the hardships, when they still believed everything was possible." Silas looked at Clara. "I want you to have this." "Silas, I can't. This is yours, if you'll take it." He fastened the chain around her neck. The locket settled against her chest, warm from his hands. "You're part of this family now, part of this legacy. My mother would want you to have it." Clara touched the locket, felt the weight of it, the history, the love that had gone into its creation and preservation. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to say more. They sat together as full darkness fell. Silas refilled their cups. They drank slowly, talking in quiet voices about everything and nothing, the kind of conversation that only happens when 2 people feel safe enough to be completely honest. "Tell me about your father," Silas said. "The real version, not the debtor everyone talked about, the man you knew." Clara was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "He was terrible with money, absolutely terrible, trusted the wrong people, made bad investments, couldn't say no when someone asked for help. But he was kind. He read to me every night when I was little, taught me to love books and learning, encouraged me to think for myself even when it wasn't proper for a young lady." Clara smiled at the memory. "He used to say that the world was changing, that women would need to be strong and smart to survive it." Sounds like he was right. He was, about that anyway. Clara took another sip of whiskey. "He died trying to do the right thing. That's more than most people can say." Morrison too. Clara turned to face Silas fully. "That's why we can't let Fitzgerald win. We owe it to them, to everyone he's hurt." "I know. When do we leave?" Silas didn't pretend to misunderstand. 2 days, maybe 3. I want to make sure we have enough supplies, that the weather will hold, that we're as ready as we can be. And then we ride into Cedar Falls, deliver the evidence to Judge Harrison, and pray he's honest enough to act on it. And if he's not, then we make it public another way. Town meeting, newspaper, whatever it takes." Silas's voice was grim. "Fitzgerald's going to pay for what he's done, one way or another." Clara nodded, felt the weight of the decision settling over her. They were committing to this path. No more hiding, no more waiting. They were going on the offensive. It was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely necessary. The whiskey and the late hour and the intimacy of the moment were making Clara bold. She set down her cup, turned in her chair to face Silas fully. "I love you," she said, the words coming easier than she'd expected. "I know it's too soon. I know we've only known each other 3 weeks. But I love you." Silas went very still, his eyes searching hers in the starlight. "Clara, you don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know. Before we go down that mountain and face whatever's waiting, I needed you to know that this is real for me, that you're real for me." "I love you too," Silas said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I thought I could love anyone after Mary. You brought me back to life, Clara. Made me remember what it means to build instead of just survive." He stood, pulled her to her feet, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Come with me," he said when they broke apart. "Where?" "Inside, to our room, to our bed." He looked at her with eyes that held both desire and question. "If you're ready, if you want this." Clara thought about the marriage certificate signed 3 weeks ago, about the ring on her finger and the locket around her neck, about the man who'd become her partner in every way that mattered. "I'm ready," she said. "I want this. I want you." They went inside together, left the whiskey and the stars behind, closed the bedroom door on the world. What happened next was private, sacred, the kind of intimacy that transforms a legal arrangement into something real and binding and complete. Clara had been afraid it might be awkward, uncomfortable. She was inexperienced, nervous, unsure of what to do or how to be. But Silas was patient, gentle. He undressed her slowly, reverently, touched her like she was something precious, whispered words that made her feel beautiful and wanted and entirely safe. And when they finally came together, it wasn't the painful duty she'd been taught to expect. It was connection, completion, 2 people choosing each other with full knowledge and full hearts. Afterward they lay tangled together in the darkness, Silas's arm around her, Clara's head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. "None. You? Not a single one?" Clara traced patterns on his chest, felt the scars there, markers of the life he'd lived before her. "Tell me about this one." "Bear. I was 19 and stupid, got between a mother and her cubs. And this one, knife fight, the Kellermans, before the final night." She touched each scar as he named it, learning the map of his body, the history written in his skin. When she'd catalogued them all, he took her hand, kissed her palm. "Your turn," he said. "I don't have any scars." "Yes, you do. They just don't show on the outside." He touched her chest, right over her heart. "But they're there, and they're healing. I can feel it." Clara pressed her hand over his, felt her own heartbeat, strong, steady, alive. "We're going to survive this," she said. Not a question, a declaration. "We're going to survive this," Silas agreed. They made love again, slower this time, learning each other, building something that would sustain them through what was coming. When Clara finally drifted off to sleep, wrapped in Silas's arms, and the warmth of the quilts his mother had made, she felt more at peace than she'd felt in years. The ring on her finger caught the moonlight. The locket around her neck held the weight of family and legacy. And the man beside her breathed steady and deep, already asleep but still holding her like she was something worth protecting. Tomorrow they would begin preparing for war. But tonight they were simply 2 people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd chosen each other with clear eyes and full hearts. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Silas packed supplies with the methodical care of someone who'd survived on the frontier for years. Ammunition, dried meat, water skins, everything they might need for the journey down and whatever came after. Clara helped, but she also spent time copying the most damning documents from Morrison's evidence, transcribing them in her neat handwriting, creating duplicates they could hide in different places. "Why?" Silas asked when he found her working by lamplight. "Insurance. If something happens to the originals, we have backups. And if we get separated, we each have evidence to use." He nodded, approving. They were thinking like soldiers now, like people who understood that the best-laid plans often went wrong, that survival sometimes depended on redundancy and preparation. On the second evening, as Clara was finishing her transcription work, Silas brought her something wrapped in oilcloth. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a gun, smaller than the rifles they'd been practicing with. A pistol, well made, perfectly balanced for her smaller hands. "For close work," Silas explained. "If things go bad in town, if you need to defend yourself and the rifle's too unwieldy." Clara lifted the pistol, felt its weight, the cold metal warming in her grip. "Have you taught me to use one of these?" "Not yet, but we've got tonight." They spent the evening in pistol practice, Silas teaching her the differences between rifles and handguns, the shorter range, the different grip, the way you had to account for the weapon's tendency to pull to one side. Clara proved to be as good with the pistol as she'd been with the rifle, her steady hands and sharp eyes translating naturally to the smaller weapon. "You're a natural," Silas said, watching her hit the target 3 times in a row. "Most people struggle with pistols, but you've got the feel for it." "Good teacher," Clara said, though she knew it was more than that. She'd discovered something about herself on this mountain. She was good at violence. Not cruel, not bloodthirsty, but competent, capable. When survival was on the line, she could do what needed doing. The thought should have disturbed her. Instead, it felt like power. That night, as they lay in bed together, Silas was quieter than usual. Clara could feel the tension in his body, the way his mind was clearly working through scenarios and possibilities. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "About what we're walking into, about all the ways this could go wrong. Tell me." "Fitzgerald has money, influence, men who'll do whatever he tells them. We're walking into his territory with evidence that could destroy him. He's not going to let that happen without a fight. So we fight." "Clara." Silas turned to face her in the darkness. "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If it comes down to choosing between the evidence and your life, you choose your life, every time, no hesitation." Clara was quiet for a moment, understanding what he was really asking. If she had to run, if she had to leave him behind, he wanted her to survive. "I can't promise that," she said finally. "Clara, no, listen." She took his hand, laced her fingers through his. "We're partners, equals. That means we survive together or we don't survive at all. I won't leave you. I won't run while you fight. Don't ask me to." Silas pulled her close, held her tight. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. You knew that when you married me." "I did." He kissed the top of her head. "All right. Together then. Whatever comes." "Whatever comes." They made love one more time, slow and tender and desperate, like people who knew the world was about to change and wanted to hold on to this moment for as long as possible. Afterward, Clara couldn't sleep. She rose carefully, not wanting to wake Silas, wrapped herself in a shawl and moved to the main room. The cabin was dark except for the dying fire, but Clara didn't need light. She knew every inch of this space now, could navigate it blind. She moved to the window, looked out at the mountain. The peaks were sharp black shapes against the star-filled sky, beautiful, eternal, indifferent to human struggles. This place had saved her, had given her time to heal, to transform, to become someone worth being. Now she was leaving it, maybe forever. The thought made her chest ache, but there was no other choice. They couldn't hide here forever, couldn't let Fitzgerald continue destroying lives. Sometimes you had to leave safety behind to fight for something bigger than yourself. "Can't sleep." Clara turned to find Silas in the bedroom doorway, bare-chested, hair mussed from sleep, looking at her with concern and understanding. "Just saying goodbye," she said. "We'll be back." "Will we really?" Clara looked around the cabin, at the home they'd built together. "What if we don't survive? What if Fitzgerald wins?" Silas crossed to her, pulled her into his arms. "Then someone else will finish what we started. Sarah Morrison, Deputy Carter, Judge Harrison if he's honest. The truth has a way of coming out eventually. But we might not be here to see it. No, we might not." He tilted her chin up, made her look at him. "But we'll have tried, we'll have fought, and we'll have done it together. That's more than most people get." Clara leaned into him, breathed in the scent of pine and wood smoke and safety, tried to memorize this feeling, this moment, the calm before the storm. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "So am I." "You're the man who lived alone on a mountain for 10 years. Especially me. I've got something to lose now." He kissed her forehead. "I've got you, and the thought of losing you terrifies me more than any bullet or knife ever could." Clara held him tighter, understanding completely. Fear was different when you had something worth protecting, someone worth fighting for. They stood together in the darkness until the fire burned completely down, until the first gray light of dawn began to show through the windows, until there was nothing left to do but face what was coming. "Today?" Clara asked. "Today," Silas confirmed. They dressed in practical clothes, Clara in the sturdy pants and shirt she'd made from buckskin, Silas in his usual leather and wool, both of them armed, both of them carrying evidence sewn into hidden pockets and pouches. They ate breakfast in silence, packed the last of their supplies onto the horses, double-checked weapons and ammunition, moved through the familiar routines one last time. Clara took a final walk around the cabin, touched the walls Silas had built, the table where they'd shared meals, the bedroom where they'd learned to be husband and wife in truth. She found herself in the pantry, the place where this had all begun, where she'd found Morrison's note and started down this path. On impulse, she pulled a piece of paper from her pocket, wrote quickly in the margin of one of Silas's supply ledgers. "If you're reading this, we didn't make it back. But we tried. We fought for justice and for each other. The evidence is real. Use it. Finish what we started. Clara Boone." She tucked the ledger back where Silas kept it, hoped no one would ever need to read those words, but felt better knowing they were there. When she emerged, Silas was waiting on the porch. The horses were ready. The sun was rising over the peaks, painting everything gold. "Ready?" he asked. Clara looked at the mountain one last time, at the sanctuary that had become home, at the life they'd built in 3 short weeks. "Ready," she said. They mounted their horses. Clara's rifle was in its scabbard. The pistol was tucked into her belt. Morrison's evidence was safe in waterproof pouches. Everything they needed to bring Fitzgerald down. Everything except certainty that they'd survive to see it happen. The trail down the mountain was familiar now. Clara had made this journey once before. Frightened, uncertain, heading toward an unknown future with a man she didn't know. This time was different. She was confident, capable, riding beside her partner and equal, heading toward danger with clear eyes and a full heart. The morning was cold but clear, perfect weather for travel. They made good time, the horses picking their way carefully down the rocky switchbacks, the forest thick around them, silent except for bird calls and the rustle of wind through pine needles. They'd been riding for about an hour when Silas pulled up short, his hand raised in warning. Clara stopped immediately, reached for her rifle. "What?" "Someone's been here, recently." He dismounted, studied the ground. Boot prints, horse tracks, maybe 3 riders. "The marshal's coming back?" "Maybe. Or someone else." Silas looked up the trail. Down the trail, his face grim. "We need to be careful. They might be waiting ahead." They continued more slowly now, both of them alert, weapons ready. The forest that had seemed peaceful now felt full of potential threats. Every shadow could hide an ambush. Every bend in the trail could reveal enemies. But they saw no one, heard nothing but the normal sounds of the mountain. Still the unease persisted. Someone had been here, recently, and that meant Fitzgerald's net was tightening. They stopped for a brief rest at a stream crossing. Let the horses drink, checked their weapons again. Neither of them spoke much. The danger ahead was too real, too close. Clara filled their water skins while Silas kept watch. As she worked, she thought about Sarah Morrison, about the girl who'd risked everything to warn them, who'd lost her father to Fitzgerald's evil but kept fighting anyway. Silas. Yeah. When this is over, I want to help Sarah. And any other woman stuck in Fitzgerald's traps. I want to use whatever money or influence we have to give them real choices. Silas looked at her, something like pride in his eyes. That's a good goal, worth fighting for. Worth surviving for, Clara corrected. They remounted. The trail ahead would take them past the burned-out Kellerman Ranch, past the mining camps where desperate men traded their lives for a few dollars, past all the markers of a frontier that was sometimes beautiful and sometimes brutal and always unforgiving. As they rode, Clara thought about the ring on her finger, the locket around her neck, the man beside her who'd become her whole world in 3 short weeks. Whatever happened in Cedar Falls, whatever came next, she wouldn't change any of it, wouldn't trade this partnership for all the safety in the world. Some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for if it came to that. Justice, truth, love, the simple, powerful things that made life worth living. The descent took most of the day. By late afternoon, they'd reached the lower elevations where the forest began to give way to scrubland and scattered settlements. The air was warmer here, thicker. After weeks on the mountain, it felt almost stifling. They passed a mining camp, rough structures and rougher men. A few looked up as they rode by, gazes lingering on Clara with the kind of speculation that made her skin crawl. But no one challenged them. No one tried to stop them. Word hasn't spread this far yet, Silas said quietly, or these men would have tried for the bounty. How much further to Cedar Falls? 3 hours, maybe less. He glanced at the sky. We could make it before dark if we push, or camp here and go in tomorrow morning. Clara thought about it. Camping meant another night of safety, of being together without the threat of immediate danger. But it also meant more time for word to spread, more time for Fitzgerald to prepare. We keep going, she decided. The longer we wait, the more time he has to plan. Silas nodded. That's what I would have chosen too. They pushed on. The trail widened into something that could almost be called a road. They began to pass more people, farmers heading home from fields, merchants traveling between towns, a circuit preacher on a tired mule. Each person who passed them was a potential informant, someone who might recognize Silas, might remember the wanted posters, might ride ahead to Cedar Falls with news that the mountain man was coming, but there was nothing they could do about it except keep moving, keep their weapons ready, keep watching for trouble. As the sun began to set, they crested a rise and saw it spread out below them. Cedar Falls, the town that had been Clara's prison, the place where Fitzgerald ruled like a king. It looked so small from up here, so ordinary. Wooden buildings and dirt streets and people going about their daily lives. No hint of the corruption festering at its heart. There, Silas pointed to a building on the edge of town. That's the Morrison house, empty since Jacob died. Sarah's living with her husband on his ranch now. Can we use it? Maybe. Get inside, wait until full dark, then approach the judge's hotel. He studied the town. Carter said Harrison was staying at the Grand Hotel, center of town. Fitzgerald will have eyes on it. So we need a distraction. Or we need to be very, very careful. They descended the final stretch of trail as the sun touched the horizon. By the time they reached the outskirts of Cedar Falls, dusk had fallen. Full darkness wouldn't be far behind. They circled wide, avoiding the main streets, staying to the shadows and back alleys, making their way toward the Morrison house through routes that kept them hidden from casual view. The house was indeed empty, dark windows, overgrown yard, the sad, neglected look of a place where someone had died and no one had cared enough to maintain it. They tied their horses behind the house, out of sight from the street, grabbed their essential supplies and the evidence, moved quickly to the back door. It was locked. But Silas had a knife and knew how to use it. Within moments they were inside. The house smelled of dust and abandonment, furniture covered with sheets, floors that hadn't been swept in months. Clara felt a pang of sadness for Jacob Morrison, for the life he'd lived here alone, for the daughter he'd tried to protect with his final act. "We'll stay here until full dark," Silas said. "Then I'll scout the hotel, see if I can get a read on how many men Fitzgerald has watching it. I'm coming with you, Clara. We're partners. Remember, we do this together." She checked her pistol, made sure the evidence was secure in its waterproof pouch. "I'm coming." Silas looked like he wanted to argue, but he'd learned over the past weeks that Clara's stubbornness was absolute. When she made up her mind, there was no changing it. "Fine, but you stay close. Do exactly what I say. No arguments." "No arguments," Clara agreed. They waited in the darkness, watching through the dirty windows as Cedar Falls settled into its evening routines, lamps being lit, shops closing, people heading home or to the saloons for their nightly drinking. It all looked so normal, so peaceful. Hard to believe that one of these ordinary-looking citizens was a murderer, a thief, a man who'd destroyed lives for profit and power. But he was out there, somewhere in this town, and soon, very soon, he'd know they were here. Clara touched the locket at her throat, the ring on her finger, drew strength from them, from the legacy they represented, from the love that had given them to her. "Ready?" Silas asked as full darkness fell. Clara took a deep breath, checked her weapons one more time, felt the weight of Morrison's evidence in her coat. "Ready." They slipped out the back door, into the night, into the heart of enemy territory. The streets of Cedar Falls were busier than Clara had expected. Even after dark, people moved between buildings, going about their business. She'd forgotten how exposed towns felt after weeks on the mountain, how vulnerable. They stuck to the shadows, moved carefully. Two people who'd learned to be invisible in the forest, now applying those same skills to an urban environment. The Grand Hotel loomed ahead, 3 stories, the largest building in Cedar Falls. Light spilled from its windows. Clara could see people moving inside, hear laughter and conversation. Somewhere in there was Judge Harrison, their best hope for justice. If they could just reach him, just deliver the evidence, then maybe possibly they'd survive this. "There," Silas whispered, pointing to a figure lounging against the hotel's side wall. "Guard, probably more around front." Clara studied the man. He looked bored, casual, but his hand rested near his gun and his eyes swept the street with practiced regularity. "How do we get past him?" "We don't. We go around." Silas gestured to an alley. "There's a back entrance, kitchen delivery door. Might be unlocked." They were halfway across the street when Clara heard it. Hoofbeats, fast, multiple riders coming from the direction they'd entered town. "Move," Silas hissed. They dove into the alley just as 4 riders thundered past. Clara pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering, watched them ride straight to the hotel's front entrance. The lead rider dismounted, ran inside, emerged moments later with another man. They spoke urgently, hands gesturing. Clara couldn't hear the words, but the meaning was clear. Someone had spotted them, reported their presence. The hunt was on. "We need to move," Silas said. "Now!" They ran down the alley, toward the back of the hotel. Behind them, Clara could hear shouting, orders being given, men mobilizing. The kitchen door was locked. Silas slammed his shoulder against it. Once, twice. It burst open with a crash that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet alley. They stumbled into the hotel's kitchen, found themselves face to face with a startled cook and two scullery maids. "Where's Judge Harrison's room?" Silas demanded. The cook just stared, mouth open, clearly trying to decide if he should scream or run. Clara stepped forward, let the lamplight fall on her face. "Please, we need to see the judge. It's important. It's justice." Something in her voice, her eyes made the cook's expression shift. He looked at Clara, really looked, saw past the rough clothes and weapons to the desperation underneath. "Third floor," he said quietly. "Room 7. Back stairs are through there." "Thank you." They ran. Up the back stairs, taking them two at a time, Clara's breath coming in gasps, the evidence heavy in her coat, the pistol heavy at her belt. Behind them, they heard the front doors burst open, heard boots on the main stairs, heard voices shouting orders. "Third floor, room 7. Clara hammered on the door while Silas covered the stairs, rifle raised, ready to fight. "Judge Harrison," Clara called. "My name is Clara Boone and I have evidence of murder that you need to see." The door opened, revealed a distinguished man in his 60s, silver hair, intelligent eyes. He took one look at Clara's desperate face, at Silas's ready weapon, at the commotion echoing up from below. "Get inside," he said. "Quickly." They dove through the door. Harrison closed and locked it behind them, moved to his desk, where Clara saw papers spread out, documents, ledgers. "You've been investigating him," she said. "Fitzgerald. For 3 months, but I've had no proof, just suspicions and inconsistencies." Harrison looked at her. "You said you have evidence." Clara pulled the waterproof pouch from her coat, dumped its contents on the desk. Letters, ledgers, documents, all in Jacob Morrison's careful handwriting, all detailing 15 years of crime. Harrison's eyes widened. He began to read, quickly at first, then more slowly, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is—" He looked up. "This is enough to hang him, multiple times over." "Then arrest him," Clara said. "Tonight, before he can destroy the evidence, before he can run." "Mrs. Boone, I can't just—" The door exploded inward. Silas spun, fired. The first man through dropped, but there were others behind him, too many. Clara drew her pistol, fired at a figure in the doorway, saw him stagger back, but more kept coming. "Get the evidence," Silas shouted. "Get it safe." Harrison was already moving, gathering the documents with shaking hands, stuffing them into a leather satchel. Clara fired again, and again. The small room filled with smoke and noise and chaos. Silas took a bullet in the shoulder, staggered but kept fighting, kept standing between Clara and the men trying to reach her. "The window," Harrison pointed. "Fire escape." Clara grabbed the satchel, grabbed Silas's arm. They crashed through the window onto a metal platform, down iron stairs, into the alley below. Behind them they heard Harrison shouting, "I'm a federal judge. This evidence is now under my protection. Any man who touches it answers to the territorial government." His words followed them into the night, along with the sound of boots and bullets and chaos. They ran through Cedar Falls like devils were chasing them, because they were. They ran through darkness and desperation. Silas's shoulder was bleeding, not badly. The bullet had grazed him rather than punching through, but blood was blood. And in a town full of men hunting them, even a small wound was dangerous. Clara pulled him into the shadows behind the general store, pressed cloth against the wound, her hands steady despite her racing heart. "How bad?" she asked. "I'll live." Silas winced as she tied the makeshift bandage. "Long enough to finish this anyway." "Don't talk like that." "Clara." "I said don't." She finished the knot, looked at him with fierce eyes. "We survived this, both of us. Remember." Behind them they heard boots, men spreading out, searching. Fitzgerald's hired guns looking for 2 fugitives who'd just delivered evidence of their employer's crimes to a federal judge. "We need to move," Silas said. "They'll check every building, every alley. We're told the church. It's the one place Fitzgerald might not think to look. And it's got a bell tower. High ground if we need to make a stand. They moved through Cedar Falls like ghosts, staying to the deepest shadows, avoiding the street lamps and the pools of light spilling from saloon windows. Every sound made Clara's heart jump. Every voice made her grip her pistol tighter. But they made it, across 3 streets and down 2 alleys, to the church where this had all begun 3 weeks ago. The door was unlocked. Clara had forgotten that frontier churches rarely locked their doors, an invitation to anyone who needed sanctuary. She hoped that applied to fugitives running from a corrupt banker's guns. Inside the church was dark and quiet. Moonlight filtered through the windows, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. The altar where they'd been married looked different now, smaller, less imposing. "Up," Silas said, gesturing to a narrow staircase that led to the bell tower. Clara climbed, her legs burning, her breath coming hard. Behind her she could hear Silas struggling, the wound in his shoulder making the climb harder than it should be. The bell tower was cramped, barely room for 2 people and the large bronze bell that gave Cedar Falls its name. But it had windows on all 4 sides, a clear view of the entire town. Clara looked out, saw torchlight moving through the streets below, men searching, at least a dozen, maybe more. "They're organized," she said. "Fitzgerald's good at organizing. It's one of the things that made him dangerous." Silas settled against the wall, checking his rifle. "How many rounds you got left?" Clara counted. 12 in the rifle, 6 in the pistol. "I've got about the same. Not enough if they find us. Not if there's as many as I think there are." "Then we hope they don't find us." "Hope's not much of a plan. It's what we've got." They settled in to wait, watching the search below, listening to voices calling to each other, orders being shouted, the town mobilizing to find them. Clara thought about Judge Harrison, about whether he'd managed to keep the evidence safe, about whether he'd even try or if Fitzgerald's money and influence would prove too strong. "Do you think he'll do the right thing?" she asked quietly. "Harrison?" Silas considered. "I think he's an honest man in a corrupt system. I think he wants to do right. But I don't know if wanting is enough. It has to be. Morrison died trusting that someone would act on his evidence. My father died trying to expose the truth. If Harrison doesn't—" Clara couldn't finish the thought. "Then we make sure he does." Silas reached for her hand, squeezed it. One way or another. The hours crawled past. Midnight came and went. The search below continued but grew less organized, less frantic. Men were getting tired, getting sloppy. Clara leaned against Silas's good shoulder, felt exhaustion pulling at her. She'd been running on adrenaline for hours, but now in this quiet moment the crash was coming. "Sleep," Silas said softly. "I'll keep watch. You're wounded. I'm functional, and you're dead on your feet. Sleep. I'll wake you if anything changes." Clara wanted to argue, but her body was making the decision for her. Her eyes were closing, her head settling against his shoulder, his warmth and the steady rhythm of his breathing pulling her under. She slept, and dreamed of mountains and safety and a cabin where the world couldn't reach them. She woke to gray dawn and the sound of a bell ringing. Not their bell. The courthouse bell. The one that called people to town meetings and emergencies and important announcements. "What's happening?" Clara asked, sitting up too fast, her neck protesting the awkward angle she'd slept in. "Harrison." Silas was at the window, watching the streets below. "He's calling a town meeting. See, people are gathering at the courthouse." Clara looked. He was right. People were emerging from homes and shops, moving toward the center of town, drawn by the bell and the promise of news. "We should go," Clara said. "Clara, they're still looking for us. If we show ourselves—" "Then we show ourselves. Harrison's making his move. We need to be there. Need to make sure Fitzgerald can't twist this." She checked her weapons. "Besides, I want to see his face when the truth comes out." Silas studied her, then nodded. "All right, but we go careful. Stay armed. And at the first sign of trouble, we run. At the first sign of trouble, Clara corrected, we fight. They descended from the bell tower, emerged from the church into the gray morning. The streets were emptier now. Most people had already headed to the courthouse, but a few stragglers remained. A woman saw them, gasped, started to say something, but Clara met her eyes, steady, unflinching, and the woman closed her mouth, looked away. Let them pass. Maybe she'd heard what happened at the hotel. Maybe she was just afraid. Either way, she didn't raise the alarm. They made it to the edge of the crowd gathering in front of the courthouse. Hundreds of people, the entire town turning out to see what the federal judge had to say. Judge Harrison stood on the courthouse steps, looking haggard, like he hadn't slept either. But his eyes were sharp, his voice clear as he raised his hands for silence. "Citizens of Cedar Falls," he began, "I have called you here this morning to address a matter of grave importance to this community." The crowd murmured, shifted, curious and nervous in equal measure. "Last night I received evidence of crimes committed by a prominent member of this town, crimes that span 15 years, crimes that have affected every person standing here." More murmurs, louder now, people looking at each other, wondering who the judge meant. Clara spotted Sarah Morrison in the crowd, standing with her rancher husband. The girl's eyes found Clara's, widened, but she didn't call out, just nodded, once, a gesture of support and understanding. "The evidence was delivered to me by Mrs. Clara Boone," Harrison continued, "a woman who has been falsely accused of being kidnapped, who has in fact been trying to expose corruption at great personal risk." All eyes turned, searching the crowd, looking for Clara. She stepped forward. Let them see her, armed, defiant, standing beside the mountain man who'd become her husband and partner. "That's her," someone whispered. "She's got a gun. And she's with Boone, the killer." But Harrison's voice cut through the whispers. "Mrs. Boone and her husband are not criminals. They are witnesses, protectors of evidence that proves Harold Fitzgerald has been embezzling town funds, orchestrating illegal foreclosures, and committing murder to cover his crimes." The crowd exploded, shouts of disbelief, anger, confusion, and beneath it all, a current of fear, because Fitzgerald was rich, powerful. If the judge was accusing him, it meant war. "That's a lie." The voice came from behind the crowd. People parted. And there he was, Harold Fitzgerald, flanked by a dozen armed men, his face purple with rage. "I am a respected businessman," Fitzgerald sputtered. "A pillar of this community. This is slander, defamation. I'll have you removed from the bench for this, Harrison." "You're welcome to try." Harrison gestured. Two federal marshals emerged from the courthouse, not local men who might be in Fitzgerald's pocket. Federal officers who answered only to the territorial government. "But first, you'll answer to these charges." "What charges, based on what evidence?" Fitzgerald's eyes scanned the crowd, found Clara, his expression twisted with hate. "Evidence provided by a confused woman and the murderer she's protecting. That's your case." "Evidence provided by Jacob Morrison," Harrison said quietly. The name hit Fitzgerald like a physical blow. His face went pale, his hands clenched. "Morrison's dead," he managed. "He is, but his documentation is very much alive. 15 years of ledgers, copies of fraudulent loan documents, letters in your handwriting." Harrison held up a piece of paper, including this one, written to Thomas Wynne the night before he died, threatening him, demanding he meet you, meeting him at the old mining office. Clara's breath caught. That was her father's letter, the one stained with blood. "Thomas Wynne died of a heart condition," Fitzgerald said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Thomas Wynne was poisoned," Harrison corrected. "Morrison documented it. He was there that night. Saw you meet Wynne. Saw you give him doctored whiskey. Saw him collapse. And he wrote it all down." The crowd had gone silent, every eye on Fitzgerald, watching the most powerful man in Cedar Falls slowly realize his empire was crumbling. "You can't prove—" I can prove everything." Harrison's voice was steel. Morrison kept copies of every fraudulent transaction, every embezzled dollar, every illegal foreclosure, and he documented your payment to the Kellerman family to force Silas Boone off his land. That caught the crowd's attention. Heads turned toward Silas, toward the man they'd called a beast, a murderer, the man they'd driven into exile 10 years ago. "The Kellermans attacked Boone land because you paid them to," Harrison continued. "You wanted the water rights, the underground spring that feeds half the valley, and when the Kellermans failed you used legal means instead, bought up Boone's debts, foreclosed on his neighbors, slowly acquired everything you needed." "This is insane," Fitzgerald said, but he was backing away now, his hired guns uncertain, looking at each other, wondering if they wanted to die protecting a man who might actually be guilty. "Harold Fitzgerald," Harrison nodded to the marshals, "you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and the murder of Thomas Wynne and Jacob Morrison." "No." Fitzgerald's hand moved toward his pocket, toward a gun Clara hadn't known he carried, but before he could draw, a voice rang out from the crowd. "Don't." Deputy Carter pushed through, his own gun drawn, pointed not at Clara and Silas, but at Fitzgerald. "It's over, Harold," Carter said quietly. "I've been your man for years. Looked the other way, took your money, did things I'm not proud of." He looked at Clara. "But I saw her at that cabin, saw the way she stood up for herself, saw the truth in her eyes, and I realized I'd been serving the wrong master." "You're a fool," Fitzgerald spat. "Maybe. But I'm a fool who's going to sleep tonight without blood on his hands." Carter gestured with his gun. "Drop your weapon. Slow." For a long moment Fitzgerald stood frozen, caught between pride and survival. Then slowly he pulled the gun from his pocket, let it fall to the dirt. The federal marshals moved in, cuffed him, led him toward the courthouse jail. As they passed, Clara Fitzgerald's eyes found hers, filled with hate and disbelief. "You were nothing," he said, voice shaking. "A debtor's daughter. Property. How did you—" "I was never nothing," Clara said quietly. "I was always exactly who I needed to be. You just never bothered to look." They dragged him away, still protesting, still refusing to believe his carefully constructed world had fallen apart. The crowd erupted, everyone talking at once, some celebrating, some shocked, some angry that they'd been fooled for so long. But Clara's attention was on the woman pushing through the crowd toward her. Sarah Morrison, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," Sarah said, grabbing Clara's hands. "My father, he didn't die for nothing." "No," Clara agreed. "He didn't." Sarah looked at Silas, at the man her father had trusted despite never meeting. "Thank you, for keeping it safe, for finishing what he started." Silas nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Your father was braver than anyone knew." "He was." Sarah wiped her eyes. "And so was yours, Mrs. Boone. Both our fathers. They're the reason we're free." Clara pulled the girl into a hug. Two women who'd been sold like livestock, who'd found their way to freedom through the courage of dead men and the determination to honor their sacrifices. When they pulled apart, Clara saw more people approaching. The old widow who'd seen the Kellerman fight, a shopkeeper who'd loaned her father money, others who'd been victimized by Fitzgerald over the years. "Is it true?" the widow asked. "About that night? About the Kellermans?" "It's true," Harrison said, stepping down from the courthouse steps. "The Kellermans were paid to attack Boone land. Silas Boone killed them in self-defense. He's not a murderer. He's a man who protected his family when the law failed to do it." The widow looked at Silas, really looked, seeing past the years of fear and reputation to the man underneath. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I saw what happened that night. I knew you gave them a chance to leave, but I was too afraid to speak, too afraid Fitzgerald would come after me next." "You're not alone in that," another voice said. then another, and another, a chorus of confession, of guilt and shame and the realization that their cowardice had driven a good man into exile for a decade. "We should have stood with you," someone said. "We should have told the truth. We should have been braver." Silas stood silent, accepting their apologies with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything. But Clara could see the emotion in his eyes, the weight of 10 years of isolation being lifted by words he'd never expected to hear. "It's done," he said finally. "The past is past, but maybe the future can be better." Harrison stepped forward, held out his hand. "Mr. Boone, on behalf of the Montana Territory, I apologize for the injustice you suffered. The false accusations, the exile, all of it. You are hereby cleared of all charges. Your reputation is restored." Silas shook the judge's hand. Clara saw his shoulders straighten, saw 10 years of shame and isolation falling away. "Thank you," Silas said, voice rough. "It's Mrs. Boone you should thank," Harrison replied. "She's the one who risked everything to bring the truth to light." All eyes turned to Clara, and for the first time in her life she didn't feel small or powerless or like property to be bought and sold. She felt seen, respected, valued. It was a good feeling. "Then we'll have more names," Silas said, "and more love, and more life filling this mountain." Clara smiled, imagined it. Children running through these woods, learning to track and hunt and survive, growing up free and strong and loved. It was a good dream. Spring came, the snow melted, the passes opened. Clara was 5 months pregnant now, starting to show, starting to slow down, but still capable, still strong. They made one trip down the mountain, to Cedar Falls, to see Sarah and settle some final business. The town had changed, or maybe Clara had changed and was seeing it differently. Either way it felt smaller, less threatening. Just a place where people lived and worked and tried to make their way. Sarah was pregnant too, due a few months before Clara. The two women spent an afternoon together, sharing fears and hopes and the strange intimacy of women growing lives inside them. "I'm naming him Jacob," Sarah said, resting a hand on her belly. "If it's a boy, after my father." "That's beautiful." "Your father would be proud of you, you know," Sarah said, "of everything you've become." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Damn pregnancy hormones. "I hope so. I know so. You're exactly who he raised you to be. Smart, strong, unwilling to accept injustice." Sarah smiled. "And you're helping more women than you know. The fund is working. We've helped 6 women escape bad situations already. Found them work. New starts. Hope." "Good. It's because of you. Your example. Your courage." Clara shook her head. "It's because of all of us. You, me, every woman who refuses to accept that being powerless is our only option." They parted with promises to write, to share news when the babies came, to support each other however distance allowed. On the ride back to the mountain, Silas was quiet, thoughtful. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked. "About legacy, about what we're building, not just the cabin or the life on the mountain, but the impact, the change, the hope we're giving people. And I think maybe that's what my parents were trying to teach me all along, that a man's legacy isn't the land he owns or the money he makes, it's the lives he touches, the good he does, the way he makes the world a little better before he leaves it." Clara reached across the distance between their horses, took his hand. "Then we're doing all right, because we're touching lives, making things better, building something worth leaving behind." "Yeah," Silas agreed. "I think we are." They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold, the sky so beautiful it almost hurt to look at. Silas helped Clara down from her horse, his hands careful on her expanding waist, protective and tender. "Home," he said. "Home." Clara agreed. They went inside, started a fire, made dinner, moved through the familiar rituals that had become their life. That night Clara stood on the porch, looking at the stars, feeling the baby move inside her, the flutter of new life preparing to enter the world. Silas joined her, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, stood beside her in comfortable silence. "Do you ever think about that day?" Clara asked. "The wedding. All the time. Do you regret it, walking into that church, changing both our lives with one kiss?" Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That kiss saved me as much as it saved you. Maybe more. I was dying up here, alone, turning into the beast they said I was. You brought me back to life. You gave me a life worth living. We gave each other that." They stood together, watching the stars, feeling the mountain wind, connected by love and choice and the simple miracle of finding each other when they'd both given up hope. "I haven't seen a woman in 10 years, Clara said softly, quoting his words back to him with a smile. Silas laughed, pulled her close. "Best decision I ever made. Walking into that church, claiming you, building this with you. Best decision I ever made was saying yes, even though I was a stranger. Especially because you were a stranger. If you'd been familiar, safe, expected, I never would have found who I really was." The baby kicked, strong enough that Silas felt it through Clara's belly. "That's our legacy," he said, wonder in his voice. "Right there, new life, new hope, new possibilities. And the lessons we'll teach, the love we'll give, the world will help build for them and everyone who comes after." "Yeah," Silas agreed. "That too." They went inside, to the warmth and safety of their home, to the life they'd fought for and earned, to the future that stretched ahead of them full of promise and possibility. Outside the mountains stood silent and eternal, witness to their love, guardian of their sanctuary, home to the family they were building one day, one choice, one act of courage at a time. And on the porch, forgotten in their retreat inside 2 coffee cups, sat on the railing, empty now, but ready for tomorrow morning's ritual, for the conversation and connection and simple joy of being together. Some love stories start with passion, some start with friendship, but the best ones start with a kiss and a promise, delivered in the most unexpected moment, by the most unlikely people, and those are the ones that last forever. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the mountain valley. Clara sat on the porch, coffee in hand, watching her daughter chase butterflies through the wildflower meadow that grew beside the cabin. Mary Boone was 4 years old, dark hair like her mother, gray eyes like her father, and the kind of fierce independence that suggested she'd inherited the best of both of them. Behind Clara she could hear Silas inside, teaching their son the basics of woodworking. Thomas was 3, quieter than his sister but just as determined, already showing signs of his father's patience and craftsmanship. And growing inside Clara again was the 3rd, another girl if her instincts were right. They'd already chosen the name, Sarah, after the friend who'd risked everything to warn them, who'd become family in the truest sense. Life had settled into a rhythm. Summers on the mountain, winters mostly snowed in, spring and fall bringing visits to Cedar Falls and news from the world beyond. The women's fund Sarah had started was thriving. It had expanded to 3 territories now, helping dozens of women escape bad situations, providing support and hope, and the knowledge that they weren't alone. Clara still wrote letters, gave advice, shared her story with women who needed to hear it. But mostly she focused on the life she'd built here, on her family, on the simple daily work of raising children and keeping a home and being a partner to the man she loved. Silas emerged from the cabin, Thomas at his heels, the boy carrying a small piece of wood he'd been shaping into a whistle. "Look, Mama," Thomas said proudly, "I made it myself." "It's beautiful," Clara said, examining his work. "Your grandfather would be proud." "Tell me about grandfather," Thomas requested, as he did nearly every day. Clara pulled him onto her lap, began the familiar story, about a man who'd been terrible with money but wonderful with love, who'd taught her to think for herself, who died fighting for what was right. Mary abandoned her butterfly hunt, climbed onto the porch. "Tell about the church," she demanded, "and Papa walking in like a hero." Silas laughed, settled into his chair. "I wasn't a hero. I was desperate." "You were brave," Clara corrected. Met his eyes over their children's heads, saw the love there, still as strong as it had been 5 years ago, maybe stronger. "Mama was brave too," Silas said. "Braver than me. She faced down marshals and killers and a man who thought he owned her, and she never flinched." The children listened rapt as their parents told the story, making it suitable for young ears, emphasizing the courage and the justice and the love, leaving out the worst of the violence and fear. When the story was done, Mary asked the question she always asked. "And then you lived happily ever after?" Clara looked at Silas, at their children, at the cabin and the mountain and the life they'd built together. "We lived," she said, "and we were happy. And we're still living and still happy. That's better than any fairy tale." "Because it's real," Thomas said seriously. "Because it's real," Clara agreed. As the sun began to set, painting the peaks in familiar shades of gold and pink, the Boone family settled in for dinner, the children chattering about their day, Silas and Clara exchanging small smiles over the chaos. After the children were asleep, Clara and Silas returned to the porch, to their coffee and their chairs and their ritual of watching the stars emerge. "Do you ever miss it?" Clara asked. "The excitement, the fight?" "Not for a second," Silas said. "This is what I was fighting for. This peace, this life, you. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't walked into that church. I'd still be alone, dying slowly, turning into the beast they called me." Silas reached for her hand. "And you'd be trapped, or dead, or surviving but not living. Instead we're here. Instead we're here, with 3 children and a life worth living and a legacy worth leaving." Clara squeezed his hand, felt the baby kick inside her, reminded again of the miracle of it all, of finding love when she'd given up hope, of building a life when she'd thought she had none left to build. "I love you," she said, the words as natural now as breathing. "I love you too," Silas replied, "more every day." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars, holding hands, together, and on the mountain in a cabin built by hand and defended by courage and filled with love, the Boone family slept, safe, protected, free. The mountain wind whispered through the pines, the stars wheeled overhead, the world kept turning. But here in this sanctuary they'd fought for and earned and built together, time moved differently, slowly, peacefully, full of small joys and simple blessings. Clara Boone had walked into a church as a powerless victim. She'd walked out as a warrior. And in the years since, she'd become something even better, a woman who knew her worth, a mother raising children to be brave and kind, a partner to a man who saw her as an equal, a builder of legacies that would outlast them both. It was more than she'd ever dreamed possible. It was enough. It was everything.